Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Kouri Richins. The death of a loved one is a devastating tragedy that deeply impacts family members and children. Each person handles the loss in their own way, trying to deal with the blow of fate. To cope with this shock, Kouri Richins, a woman, wrote an entire book. It seemed that she, more than anyone else, understood the depth of what happened. However, as the police delved deeper into the tragic death of a man from Utah, it became increasingly clear that there was more cynicism. Eric Richins was born in 1982 as the eldest of 3 children, with 2 younger sisters, Katie and Amy. He shared a special bond with Katie. The family lived in Summit County, Utah, where they were well known and wealthy, thanks to their cattle ranch. Many buildings in the town still bear the family's last name. Despite their prominence, the Eric were humble and kind, and they were respected by everyone who knew them. Eric grew up on his parents' farm, where he participated in sports and helped with chores. His family was part of the Mormon Church, and religion played a major role in Eric's life. He spent 2 years on a mission trip to Mexico City, where he demonstrated good character by helping the community. Upon his return, Eric attended the University of Utah, where he earned a bachelor's degree in international law. During this period, Eric began dating Julia Jurgensen. They married when Eric was just 20 years old. However, due to their youth and desire for independence, they couldn't maintain the marriage and decided to divorce. After his studies and the failed marriage, Eric saw promising opportunities to start a construction business, which he began to pursue. Eric frequently visited the Home Depot store, where he enjoyed chatting with the cashiers while waiting for his order. During his visits, he noticed a charming cashier named Kouri, who was widely considered one of the most beautiful women in town. Eric was captivated by her beauty and secretly in love with her. But he hesitated to ask her out because he was still dealing with the emotional and financial fallout from his difficult divorce. Eric's celibacy continued for a while, but eventually, he asked Kouri out, and she agreed. Their first date was filled with laughter and fun. They got along well, and their relationship developed quickly. The couple was truly happy despite their significant difference in social status. Eric was always cheerful and sociable, able to cheer her up on Kouri's worst days. Despite the shock from his first marriage, Eric quickly realized that Kouri was the one for him and soon proposed. She accepted, and after a whirlwind romance, they got married in 2013. Kouri was not only beautiful but also intelligent. She attended her chosen university and earned a bachelor's degree in health management, followed by a master's degree. Kouri had previously worked as an administrator at a design agency before meeting Eric in a hardware store. Kouri became a new ray of light and hope for him, giving him confidence that he could build a loving family. Kouri was born in 1990 in an ordinary family. Kouri has an older brother and an older sister. Her father died at the age of 57 in 2010, after struggling with alcoholism. He was unable to witness Kouri's wedding, which took place 3 years after his death. Before the wedding, Eric's mother insisted on a prenuptial agreement to protect her son from experiencing another shock like his previous divorce. At that time, Eric's business share was worth about $2.5 million. His mother presented the agreement as a precaution in case of divorce. According to the prenup, Kouri could not claim Eric's money, and he could not claim hers. Eric arranged for Kouri and partner Cody to be the beneficiaries on his life insurance policy. In the event of his death, Cody could use his portion of the insurance payout to buy out Eric's share of their business. After their wedding, Eric and Kouri began their ideal life together. They bought their home, lived happily, and hoped to have children. Inspired by her successful brother who had made a fortune buying, renovating, and selling houses, Kouri decided to follow the same path. With Eric's experience in the construction industry, Kouri obtained her real estate broker's license and began selling real estate. Her friendly nature and attractive appearance quickly made her a well-known real estate broker in town, which made Eric proud. Eventually, Kouri shared her brother's business model with Eric and they began working together. Kouri identified profitable properties for resale, Eric managed the renovations, and they sold the homes. Their business flourished until a couple sued Kouri for failing to disclose the true condition of a home. The lawsuit was settled out of court and did not affect their business. After 9 years of marriage, they have 3 sons, Weston, Carter, and Ashton. Despite his busy work schedule, Eric values family time, being actively involved in his sons' lives and supporting them in sports. Since 2020, things have been unusual in their relationship. While on vacation in Greece, Eric called younger sister Amy and said Kouri had given him a drink that made him feel sick. He suspected she was trying to poison him and warned that if he suddenly died, Kouri would be responsible. Although the family was concerned, they dismissed Eric's claims as paranoid because the couple seemed happy. After the vacation, Eric secretly changed his will in November 2020, leaving his business shares and assets to younger sister Katie without telling Kouri. The couple continued to live together for another 1.5 years until early 2022. This time, the conflict was over Kouri's desire to buy an unfinished mansion for $2 million, which she thought could be sold for $5 million after renovations. Eric is skeptical about the deal's profitability, causing tension between them. Kouri accuses Eric of controlling her business, while he believes the investment is too risky. Around this time, Cody, Eric's business partner, was notified by the insurance company that Kouri had tried to change the beneficiary on Eric's life insurance policy to her name. Although she was unsuccessful, this raised serious concerns about her intentions. Eric started considering divorce, knowing that Kouri would lose everything due to their marriage contract. Eric had already transferred his share to younger sister and removed Kouri's name from all documents, including the insurance policy. Meanwhile, Kouri spent $1,000 on powerful and dangerous painkillers. On Valentine's Day 2022, Eric told Cody that after eating a sandwich Kouri made, he suffered severe respiratory irritation, similar to an earlier incident in Greece. Despite his suspicions, Eric did not leave Kouri's side or stop eating her food. Eric continued to be suspicious of Kouri, especially after he refused to buy the mansion. On the night of March 4th, Eric, 39, was found dead in his bed. The night before, Kouri had made Eric a Moscow Mule over dinner. After he finished drinking it, they went to bed. During the night, Kouri woke up to comfort one of their sons, who had been having a nightmare. When she returned to the bedroom around 3 a.m., she found Eric cold and unresponsive. She called 911, saying that Eric had no signs of life and that her attempts to resuscitate him had failed. Paramedics confirmed Eric's death, and Kouri mentioned that she had attempted CPR on him, but doctors doubted her story. The man was bleeding from his mouth, but his wife had no blood on her. His death appeared to be due to a drug overdose, as tests showed his blood levels were 5 times higher than the lethal dose. When Kouri was asked why he was taking such a strong drug, she said she didn't know. Eric's family denied that he had any health problems that would warrant such medication. A review of his medical history revealed that he had not seen a doctor in a long time and that no one had prescribed him this hard-to-get prescription drug. Eric had no history of drug addiction or convictions and was otherwise healthy. Just one day after Eric's death, a dispute broke out between Kouri and Katie. Kouri discovers that all of her husband's businesses and assets are legally Katie's, leaving Kouri with nothing. This revelation caused Kouri to become aggressive, and she attacked Katie, leading to the police being called. Unwilling to back down, Kouri filed a lawsuit, claiming that the prenuptial agreement had been violated. She argued that her name could not be removed from the will and insurance policy without her consent. Kouri asked for her rightful share and $300,000 in attorney's fees. In response, Katie took legal action against Kouri, suspecting foul play in her brother's death and accusing Kouri of poisoning her brother for financial gain. Police began investigating Eric's death and suspected it was not an accident. Kouri was the prime suspect. During the investigation, police requested access to Kouri's cell phone. They discovered that messages with Neil, the salesman, had been deleted, but police were able to recover them. Kouri said her husband's death was a huge loss for her and was especially difficult for Eric's 3 sons, as he was very important to them. Kouri played the role of a grieving, mourning widow to avoid suspicion. Police continued working on the case and found another inconsistency in Kouri's testimony. According to her story, she went to her son's room at night without her phone, leaving it charging on the nightstand beside her bed. However, records showed that she was actively using the phone at that time, messaging various people. It was even determined that the phone was in motion, indicating she was walking around the house with it. This information did not match her story. The police questioned Neil, the person who sold the medicine and supplied her with the medicine. He confessed everything. He revealed that she had been experimenting with different drugs, claiming that none of them helped with her severe back pain. Little did Neil know that the drugs had an entirely different purpose. In exchange for testifying against Kouri, Neil was not charged. During the investigation, it was discovered that Kouri had repeatedly taken out life insurance policies on her husband. Immediately after his death, she contacted the insurance company and received $100,000. The day after her husband died, she hired a locksmith to open his safe and took about $150,000 from it. With Eric gone, there was no one to fund Kouri projects, and she was also burdened with significant debts at the time of his death. She owed $190,000 in taxes, $1,847,000 to creditors for a mansion purchase, and another $514,000. Kouri then wrote a book called You're With Me with her sons. She wanted a book to help her children cope with the loss of a loved one. So she decided to write it herself. After the book was completed, Kouri began appearing on various shows to talk about her book. She said that the death of her husband, Eric, was a shock, and she dedicated the book to him and her children. Sales of the book skyrocketed, becoming widely popular within a few weeks. Many mothers bought it to help their children cope with the loss of a loved one. The book's plot was particularly intriguing. In the story, the husband dies from a brain aneurysm. For the Kouri, it was a means to secure financial stability since she was in financial ruin. In the book, Kouri seems to imply that she did something to her husband, which seems suspicious. Despite everything, Kouri profited from her husband's death, benefiting from insurance payouts and earnings from selling a book. She exploited her children's grief for monetary gain. There were also suspicions that Kouri might have killed her husband. Rumors suggested that Kouri had an affair during her marriage and wanted to be with this man without losing the affluent lifestyle her husband Eric provided. Divorce would have been financially disadvantageous for Kouri, so she allegedly killed her husband to get his money. Another motive was Eric's refusal to finance the purchase of a house. 6 months after her husband Eric died, Kouri's family noticed that she was preparing a Pinterest folder with wedding ideas. This confused everyone, since all of her friends and relatives were married and no one was planning a wedding, leading to speculation that Kouri might be preparing for her wedding to her lover. On May 8, 2023, 2 months after actively promoting her book, 33-year-old Kouri Richins was arrested on charges of first-degree murder with aggravated circumstances. She was also charged with possession of a large amount of a controlled substance. The investigation into her husband Eric's death on May 4, 2022, lasted more than a year. Kouri is currently being held without bail pending trial. Kouri's neighbors and many family members were shocked and could not believe that she had caused her husband's death. Kouri Richins gave numerous interviews, presenting herself as a grieving widow who, even a year after her husband's death, had not yet come to terms with the loss. This strategy helped her gain sympathy from television viewers. The interview was broadcast nationwide, causing a significant public response. Kouri received significant support and increased sales of her book. She attempted to defend herself by blaming her late husband for past problems with illegal substances, but this claim has never been verified. The couple's 3 children now live with Eric's family, and temporary custody is with Eric's younger sister, Katie. Kouri's book could ultimately be crucial for prosecutors in painting Kouri Richins' death as a calculated murder with an elaborate cover-up. The judge has scheduled a pre-trial conference for September 23 for the prosecution and defense to discuss jury selection. A trial date has not yet been set. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Jean Domenico. Jeanine Domenico was born on August 29, 1959, in Massachusetts, USA. After graduating from college in 1987, she moved to Shore, New Hampshire, where she married Anthony Kaczynski and started a family. They had 2 children, a daughter named Nicole and a son named Charlie, born 2 years apart. Unfortunately, after Charlie's birth, Jean's marriage began to deteriorate. Anthony became aggressive and abusive, which ultimately led to their divorce. After the divorce, Jean worked hard with Nicole, who had a developmental delay. Because of Jean's dedication, Nicole learned to manage her condition by the time she started school. However, after enrolling her children in school, Jean faced financial difficulties and wanted to work more. Fortunately, a neighbor helped care for the children. Despite her busy schedule, Jean prioritized her children and spent all her free time with them. When the children turned 14 and 12, Jean began working at an insurance agency about 20 minutes from home. With her heavy workload, she could no longer pick them up from school, but the teenagers were able to get home on their own, which helped them become more independent. In 2000, while working at an insurance company, Jean met Chris McVan. He was attracted to her professionalism and deep love for her children. They began dating and eventually became engaged, but Jean chose to postpone their wedding plans. She lived in a small house that was too small for the 3 of them, while Chris had a spacious house of his own. Although Chris was eager for them to move in together, Jean asked them to wait until her children were older, wanting to build her life with them without the added stress. Chris was very understanding and sometimes slept over, but he preferred to leave early in the morning to avoid having to queue for the bathroom. As Nicole's daughter turned 16, she entered a typical rebellious phase and started a relationship that Jean disapproved of. At the same time, Charlie began associating with a bad crowd, becoming hot-tempered and aggressive. It appeared that his transition into adulthood would be even more challenging than his sister's. Jean worried greatly while she was at work, leaving the children at home alone. She was particularly concerned because their biological father had been a domestic abuser who frequently resorted to violence, and Jean feared that her son might follow that same path. On August 6, 2003, the family's day started like any other. Chris woke up at 6 a.m., kissed Jean, and went to work, looking forward to dinner that evening. Jean finished work at 5 p.m. and went home, while Chris was still busy in a meeting. When Chris's meeting finally ended around 7 p.m., he called Jean to check in before they went out for dinner, but he was surprised when she didn't answer. He thought she might be out walking the dogs or busy getting ready. Before leaving the office, Chris noticed he had a missed call from his daughter Nicole, along with a long voicemail. In the message, Nicole sounded worried and frustrated because she had not been able to reach her mother or brother. She said she was going to be with her boyfriend William. The way she spoke was so chaotic that it was difficult for Chris to understand how serious the situation was. Chris decided to drive to Jean's house to talk things over. When he arrived, he quickly noticed Jean's car in the driveway, indicating she wasn't out walking the dogs, as they were barking in the backyard. Chris thought Jean should have been home for at least 2 hours and had enough time to finish her chores before dinner. However, the house was dark and there was no sign of her. Concerned and not getting any response to his calls, Chris used his spare key to unlock the door. Once inside, he found the house eerily quiet, with the lights off as if the power had been cut. He called out for Jean as he moved through the dark rooms, but there was no reply. As his eyes adjusted to the dimness, he spotted Jean lying motionless on the kitchen floor. Chris feared she had passed out again due to her new strict diet, as she had fainted several times before from hunger. Worried she might have hit her head, he rushed over, shook her gently, and called her name, pleading for her to wake up, but she didn't respond. In the dark, Chris saw a puddle of blood beneath Jean. Panicking, he took out his mobile phone and called the rescue service. When the dispatcher answered, Chris's voice trembled, and he mumbled in confusion. He told the operator that he thought Jean had fainted due to her diet and had hit her head, which explained the blood. Without any light, he couldn't grasp how serious the situation truly was. As he waited for the police and medics, Chris sat in a chair, trying to calm down. He failed to notice the bloodstains scattered across the kitchen or the broken and disordered furniture around him. On the refrigerator, there was a note from his daughter. It explained that she wouldn't be joining the family for dinner because she was going out with her boyfriend. The note was signed William and Nicole, expressing their love and gratitude for Jean. Throughout the ordeal, Chris stayed in contact with the 911 dispatcher. However, due to his panic and shock, he struggled to follow the instructions and couldn't check for a pulse. While on hold waiting for the police, he still clung to the hope that Jean was alive. He knelt beside her, cradled her head, and gently fixed her hair. He kissed her and whispered that he loved her. In that moment, he felt how cold she was and noticed her vacant, glassy eyes. Chris came to the painful realization that Jean was dead, but he couldn't accept it. The nearest police patrol was just minutes away from the Jean's home. When the officers arrived, they were confronted with a gruesome scene. 43-year-old Jean lay in a pool of her own blood in the kitchen, having been brutally stabbed and beaten. It was clear her death was violent. Understandably, Chris, her lover, became the primary suspect. He was visibly shaking when the patrol arrived, struggling to speak after discovering her body. Karen Smith, a 29-year-old mother of 3 and a frequent babysitter for Jean, saw the disturbance in the yard and went to investigate. While Jean's fiancé was in shock and crying, the police spoke with the neighbor, hoping she might have heard or seen something during the attack. Unfortunately, she couldn't offer any useful information. The police cordoned off the area around the house, preventing local residents from entering the secured zone while they conducted their investigation. When local residents learned about the murder, they were heartbroken. The Jean was a kind and vibrant woman, making her death particularly shocking to those who knew her. Neighbors felt unsafe knowing that a dangerous killer was still at large. At the crime scene, police uncovered evidence of a horrific attack involving multiple knives. One knife was found in the sink with a broken handle, while the blade lay on the floor near the victim's body, suggesting it broke during the assault. Another knife was discovered in the backyard, and a bloody palm print was found on the refrigerator. A trail of blood stretched from the kitchen to the living room, leaving even seasoned police officers stunned by the severity of the crime. Police noted that the killer appeared so angry that they did not care about the evidence they left behind. This type of behavior often indicates that the perpetrator had a personal connection to the victim and may have harbored a deep grudge against her. After a brief examination of the scene, the officers returned to Chris, who was still in shock and struggling to answer even basic questions. They watched Chris closely, as he was the prime suspect due to his unusual behavior and the circumstances surrounding him. Once Chris was able to speak with the officers, he shared his own suspicions. After realizing that Jean's death was not an accidental fall, he believed that only one person could be responsible. In his opinion, Jean's ex-husband, Anthony Kaczynski, was abusive and had a troubled relationship with her. The police recorded his statement and spoke to Jean's neighbors and relatives, who confirmed that Jean had indeed had problems with Anthony. She had previously mentioned being afraid of him. It was known that the teenager had a bad relationship with his mother. He felt angry with her because they had become estranged from his father and other issues. After hearing the conversation, Charlie believed that his father could not have harmed his mother, so he reported this belief to the police. He quickly called his father to clarify, and Anthony assured Charlie that he had nothing to do with the incident. Later, Anthony's alibi was verified. Chris said that Jean was so afraid that she wouldn't even keep knives in the house, fearing that her son Charlie might use them in future conflicts. In fact, Jean was so afraid of sharp objects that she refused to even keep them in the house. Before she started dating Chris, she had confided many times that she felt like she was about to die from cold weapons. Surprisingly, this strange obsession turned out to be a premonition. After Chris gave her a set of knives, Jean had a hard time agreeing to use them. At first, she locked the set in her bedroom when she went to sleep. Gradually, she got used to it and started using it recently. Before the tragedy, Nicole and Jean's arguments began. Nicole increasingly clashed with her mother, who still treated her like a child. One of the main obstacles was Nicole's relationship with her boyfriend. Jean was not sure Nicole was old enough to be with Nicole's 18-year-old bad boy, William. At the time of the massacre, they had been dating for over a year. They mostly communicated on the internet. Jean and her daughter disagreed on this issue. Nicole met William in May 2002 when she was 14 years old, and the guy was 17. They began to correspond, and their connection immediately strengthened. Despite the fact that the young man lived in Connecticut with his mother, the couple seriously intended to date and develop a relationship. The young man was born prematurely in 1985 into a dysfunctional family. Once, when he was still very young, his father quarreled with his wife and struck her hard in the face. Life in a cruel and indifferent family had a negative impact on the William. From a young age, he displayed aggressive behavior, frequently breaking things and often hurting his sisters. During this time, his father's inappropriate actions forced their mother, with 5 children to care for, to seek refuge in a motel. One tragic day, the family's house caught fire, and he watched helplessly as their belongings were consumed. He feared that his father was trapped inside. The sound of fire truck sirens haunted him for many years. His mother observed that after the fire, he changed significantly. William began to frequently discuss death, exaggerate his childhood experiences, and express a wish to die to her. As he grew older, William began to exhibit cruelty and aggression, often directed at strangers. When he was 8 years old, he experienced a devastating loss when 2 of his best friends died in a car accident. This trauma deeply affected him, leading to the development of psychological disorders that resulted in his admission to a psychiatric hospital for 30 days. During his treatment, he struggled with anger towards his mother, which he expressed during phone calls. While at the psychiatric clinic, William was prescribed medication to help manage his aggression, but this had a negative impact on him. He became reliant on these drugs to control his behavior. His mother believed that repeated hospital stays were the only solution to his mental health issues. However, doctors were unable to provide a clear diagnosis, rendering their efforts largely ineffective. Starting at the age of 9, William's problems intensified. In 1994, he attacked one of his sisters with a baseball bat and damaged various items in the house. This led to another hospitalization, and similar incidents occurred 2 more times. Throughout these admissions, doctors tried to understand what disorders he was facing. Another significant episode happened when he was 13, during which he frequently ran away from school and initiated fights. The longest duration he spent in a psychiatric clinic was an entire year. After that, William continued to attack his sisters and mother, often using his favorite weapon, a baseball bat. Following a lengthy treatment at the clinic, he was prescribed a new medication aimed at stabilizing patients with schizophrenia. From that point on, William's behavior became noticeably more manageable, bringing relief to his mother and sisters. However, in 2001, about a year before he met Nicole online, he had another outburst of anger. He threatened to harm himself, prompting his mother to call the police. He was admitted to a psychiatric hospital again, where he stayed for about a month. When William started dating, he and his girlfriend began to communicate regularly through the internet and phone calls. This long-distance relationship turned out to be quite expensive, with Jean quickly noticing the high costs. Their frequent calls resulted in bills of $500 and even $1,000. The age difference in William's behavior became major concerns for Jean, who was already worried about the relationship. Jean was concerned about her daughter's future and the potential risks of her relationship with an older man. Meanwhile, William was charming Nicole with compliments and showing sensitivity, which easily swayed the inexperienced schoolgirl. Jean suspected that William was intentionally trying to make Nicole fall in love with him in order to push for a more intimate relationship. Jean recognized that this kind of behavior often comes from manipulators, and she feared her daughter might become a victim of someone like him from the internet. As a result, she tried to slow down the progression of their relationship. When Jean began to receive large phone bills, she banned Nicole from using the phone. This decision upset Nicole and led to an argument. In response, William wrote to Jean, expressing his admiration for her and thanking her for raising such a wonderful daughter. He asked her permission to continue seeing Nicole, saying that he was serious about their relationship. They had plans to move in together and start a family, and they both wanted to find jobs. However, instead of feeling happy about this, Jean was filled with fear. She felt that William was dangerous. Nicole convinced her mother to take her to Connecticut to meet William in person. Her mother saw this as an opportunity to end their relationship, believing that seeing the bad guy in person would turn Nicole off. She planned an 8-hour trip with Nicole. Unfortunately, her plan backfired. After the meeting, Nicole fell even more in love with William and ignored her mother's warnings about him. Nicole cried for 2 hours on the way home over the breakup, leaving Jean shocked at her daughter's immaturity. Nicole pleaded to transfer to a school in Connecticut so she could be near William. But Jean made it clear that until Nicole turned 18, she would live with her mother and younger brother. This became a source of tension in their relationship for the next 15 months. William got a job at McDonald's, helping his family financially while also trying to win over Nicole's mother. Meanwhile, Nicole struggled to live with her mother and brother, away from her boyfriend. Nicole and William both write letters to Jean, but their attempts seem childish and unconvincing. Jean remains adamant that Nicole must stay with her until she is an adult. William got his driver's license and saved enough money to buy a car, which made him excited to visit Nicole. In August 2003, he fulfilled his dream and went to see her. Nicole's mother hesitantly allowed him to stay for just a week so they could spend time together. Because Jean worked long hours, she let William stay at her home when she wasn't there. Their neighbor, Karen, occasionally checked on them throughout the day, claiming she was protecting them from getting too close. This, of course, was naive. One day, Nicole asked Karen to buy a pregnancy test, revealing that she and William had grown intimate. Karen was shocked and intended to tell Jean about it, but she never got the chance. Tragically, Jean was found dead in her home. The forensic expert concluded that she had been brutally beaten with a baseball bat. The evidence, including her injuries and the disarray in the house, indicated a prolonged struggle. In addition to numerous blunt object injuries, 53 stab wounds were found on Jean's body, especially on her arms, suggesting that these were defensive wounds during an attack. The most severely injured areas of the Jean were her head, face, neck, and upper chest. The attacker intended to kill her. Forensic analysis revealed 28 stab wounds concentrated in the neck, face, and upper body, indicating the seriousness of the injuries. The forensic expert noted that the Jean suffered for a prolonged period. Despite multiple injuries, only one stab wound to her arm struck a vital area, rendering her unable to move or call for help. This ultimately led to her losing consciousness and dying during the assault. The attacker also punctured her lung, causing her to suffocate as it filled with blood. When Chris learned of the severity of the attack, he was devastated. At that point, he regained consciousness and was willing to cooperate with the police. He provided a DNA sample. Chris went on to blame Jean's ex-husband, Anthony, for the attack, saying that Jean had expressed fear of Anthony, claiming that he had threatened to kill her. In the evening, Nicole and William returned to the house but were stopped by the police cordon and not allowed onto the property. The officers were initially unsure of their identities. Once they recognized the young couple, the police detained them and took them to the station for questioning. William appeared very anxious and restless, explaining that his anxiety stemmed from mental health issues. His mood fluctuated rapidly. At times he was friendly and willing to talk, while at other moments he became aggressive and withdrawn. This erratic behavior raised the officers' suspicions. Nicole and William were interrogated separately. William stated that he last contacted Jean around 2 p.m. He mentioned that they had walked together in the supermarket and planned a family dinner with Jean and Chris that evening before he was supposed to return to Connecticut. He claimed he knew nothing about the attack. In contrast, Nicole began crying immediately, making it hard to understand her. She became even more distressed when she learned about her mother's death. After a while, she calmed down enough to explain that they had spent the day in the supermarket. However, her account had significant inconsistencies compared to William's, which led police to suspect that he was not being truthful. As a result, they requested DNA samples for analysis. The main issue was Nicole's story about buying a shirt that William claimed to have worn all day, but it was missing when he was arrested. He also couldn't explain the whereabouts of the new shirt, which raised suspicions. This was odd, unless he got rid of it because it was stained with blood. When the police noticed this detail, William became visibly more nervous as they asked him probing questions. Eventually, he grew aggressive and refused to talk, citing his mental health problems. The police then asked when he last took his medication. At first, he said he hadn't taken his last dose due to being held and questioned, but later he changed his story and admitted he had not taken his pills for several days. The young couple seemed to be hiding something and begin to feel pressured. Nicole tearfully shares her problems with her mother, while William confesses that he has many burdens on his conscience that he feels he cannot reveal. They reveal that William has been planning to take Nicole with him when he leaves home, a plan that Jean is strongly against. William constantly pressures Nicole. This manipulation makes her feel responsible for their troubles, and she often blames her mother for forbidding them. Eventually, the couple managed to escape from the police station, but they were caught again 2 days later. This time, Nicole and William confessed to killing Jean and were questioned separately. At first, William joked about her death, but it quickly became clear he was serious. He suggested they mix prescription drugs into Jean's morning coffee, thinking she would either overdose or fall asleep while driving, leading to a fatal accident. Unfortunately for them, their plan did not succeed. William came up with a new plan. He decided to add bleach to the cream that Jean used in her coffee. However, Jean noticed the strong smell and refused to drink it, which led them to think of more extreme measures. They considered setting Jean on fire in a car, but William's childhood fear of flames made that plan unfeasible. They then thought about blowing up the house with her inside, but that plan also didn't work out. Ultimately, William chose to confront Jean with a baseball bat, a weapon he had favored since he was a child. Initially, Nicole opposed this violent idea, but after some consideration, she changed her mind and agreed. On the day of the attack, William waited at home with the electricity turned off. Meanwhile, Nicole stayed in a car parked at a nearby store, making sure Chris wouldn't come back. When Jean entered the house, an argument broke out between her and William. In a sudden moment of escalation, he grabbed the baseball bat, marking it as the point of no return. The confrontation quickly turned violent as he swung the bat. Despite Jean's efforts to defend herself, he continued to strike her. Then, he picked up a larger knife and inflicted even more injuries. When police asked William how many times he stabbed Jean, he said it was about 8, but that was a significant understatement. In reality, he inflicted 53 stab wounds on her. After the brutal incident, William tried to clean up the house before going back to the car where Nicole was waiting. Visibly shaken, he urged Nicole to go home and get him a towel to clean up the blood, and she agreed. Nicole entered the house, unfortunately stepping over her mother's body. She left a note on the refrigerator, took a towel and a knife she found, but then discarded both items before going to get William a change of clothes. The police collected evidence at the crime scene, including bloody handprints on clothes and shoes. William and Nicole were arrested and charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy. From the start, William's lawyer highlighted his mental health issues. However, according to the prosecutor's office, William was aware of his actions during the attack and had meticulously planned the crime. Nicole convinced the prosecution to accept a deal. As part of this agreement, she later testified against William, resulting in her receiving a prison sentence. However, she could reduce her sentence by 5 years if she completed an educational program while incarcerated. In 2005, William's trial began. Nicole claimed her actions were motivated by innocence and love, but she had played a role in the tragedy of her mother's death. The defense highlighted William's family problems. It was known that his mother drank heavily during her pregnancy, which may have contributed to his premature birth and many of his developmental challenges. The prosecution argued that Nicole had incited him to kill his mother. Nicole was aware that her boyfriend struggled with anger management. According to the defense, she exploited William for her own gain. William argued that he should be placed in a mental hospital instead of prison. However, the trial did not support this request. The jury found William Sullivan guilty and the judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Inman family. William Inman and Sandra's story began in 1983 when they met at church. He was 18 and she was 16. With their parents' approval, they quickly got married and moved to Logan, Ohio. William was a devoted religious man who worked as a builder. In his free time, he volunteered at the Evangelical Church of the Tabernacle of Faith near Nelson Villa, where he played musical instruments. Meanwhile, Sandra, as a housewife, supported her husband's spiritual activities. In 1984, the couple had their first child, a son named William Jr. To prevent any confusion, the church community referred to the father as Bill and the son as Will. Over the years, Will grew up. In 2001, at the age of 17, he met 15-year-old Summer Cook at a church service. Their meeting was strikingly similar to the love story of Bill and Sandra. The young couple dated for 3 years, and in 2004, after Summer turned 18, they got married. They quickly settled into Will's parents' large house in Logan. In the same year, 39-year-old Bill Inman declared himself a spiritual leader and turned his garage into a temporary church, where he started holding services. Although local residents were initially skeptical of him as a self-proclaimed pastor, his church began to gather followers. It started with neighbors and gradually expanded to their acquaintances. People were drawn there to pray, seek comfort, and make donations. In 2005, Will and Summer joyfully welcomed a son named Alex. However, they soon encountered financial challenges. Will's work at the church did not provide enough income, so the family chose to seek better opportunities in another state. In 2006, the Inman family relocated to Florida. They soon found jobs in the construction industry, building hotels in their new location. Meanwhile, Sandra and Summer looked after their home and raised little Alex. After 2 years, however, they missed their hometown and decided to return to Ohio. Unfortunately, they had lost the right to repurchase their previous house in Logan while they were away, so they had to rent a different place in rural Vinton. In 2008, shortly after returning, Will and Summer welcomed their second child, a daughter named Kale. 2 years later, they had their third child, another daughter named Alana. Despite the difficulties of raising young children, Will and Summer made an effort to carve out time for themselves. Almost every weekend, they entrusted their kids to Bill and Sandra, who happily embraced their roles as grandparents. For this elderly couple, their grandchildren brought immense joy and purpose to their lives. In the spring of 2010, Bill Inman was officially appointed as a pastor of the Church of the Tabernacle of Faith. Alongside his wife, he established a charitable organization named Ranch of Mercy, which was created to assist those in need, particularly people who had lost their jobs or homes. Bill had a vision of constructing a large shelter for orphans and widows, intending to build it himself. Unfortunately, he faced challenges due to insufficient funding to make this dream a reality. Bill proposed holding a lottery to raise funds. He planned to sell tickets for $10 each to reach his financial goal. The winner will receive either a new house or $200,000. Bill also promised to give away 99 other valuable prizes in a raffle. Information about the lottery was shared through local media and advertising. Bill went door to door, encouraging people to support the cause by buying tickets, assuring them that the money raised would be used to build a shelter for those in need. In total, Inman sold 100,000 tickets and raised $1 million. The prize draw is set for September 2010. While Bill was busy with charity work, issues were developing in the Inman family. In June 2010, Summer informed her husband that she wanted a divorce after 6 years of marriage. Before this conversation, she had written a painful entry in her diary, expressing that she was very tired of trying to please everyone and felt exhausted. She questioned whether she deserved happiness and if she had the right to fall in love again and feel loved in return. She acknowledged that it might not be the best time, but she felt the need to tell Will the truth, believing he deserved to know that she did not want to be with him anymore. She mentioned that she needed time alone to figure out who she really was, as she felt like she was just following orders at that moment. Summer emphasized her love for her children, stating that she wouldn't trade them for the world, but she did not want them to see their mother merely obeying someone else. She expressed uncertainty about how Will would react, fearing that he might get angry, try to take the kids, or even threaten her. She believed they should share equal time with the children, but she knew his parents would oppose this and try to persuade her to stay, although she realized that wouldn't change anything. She also recounted that yesterday, Will had asked her what she wanted, but she couldn't answer because all she knew was what she didn't want, to be unhappy and feel trapped. Yet, she remained silent every day, saying that all she could do was cry and sleep. She admitted that she just didn't know how to escape the situation and make everything right, hoping that when she wrote again, she would have found the answer. Summer filed for divorce and moved out of the Inman's house with the children and essential belongings to her parents' home. She wanted to ensure that Alex, Kale, and Alana could still communicate with their father, so she allowed them to visit Will and his parents. 2 months after leaving her husband, Summer began a relationship with Adam Peters. At the same time, she took a job as a cleaner at a bank in downtown Logan, as she had no formal education and struggled to find other employment. Meanwhile, September and October passed, but the drawing that Bill from Ranch of Mercy had promised never took place. It also became clear that construction on the prize house hadn't even started, and the Bill family was slow to refund people's money for the tickets. In early December 2010, the Inmans received notice that they needed to leave their rented home due to unpaid debts. After this news, Summer, accompanied by Adam, went to collect their belongings. However, Will and his parents refused to let her in. Summer called the police, claiming that Will was threatening her and wouldn't return her personal items. When officers arrived, Will continued to deny entry. He threatened to shoot Adam, and even got into a confrontation with a police officer. In her statement, Summer explained that before their wedding, she and Will appeared to have a perfect relationship, but everything changed after they married. Will became controlling and jealous, making unfounded accusations. He dictated her actions and invaded her privacy, affecting her eating habits, household responsibilities, and even their sexual relationship. Summer was so restricted that she couldn't sleep without his permission. He essentially kept her confined to the house and took away her phone and keys. She revealed that Will had always wanted to have 12 children with her and had even considered marrying a second wife. He frequently visited websites for polygamous families, where he shared explicit photos. Will also threatened to kill Summer if she tried to leave him. At one point, he took her cherished cats, drove them far away, and then lied, saying they had escaped through an open window, laughing and claiming she would never see them again. After Summer accused him of wrongdoing, Will attempted to defend his actions by saying he took her phone and keys because he thought she was being unfaithful. Regarding the cats, he claimed he took them to a shelter because they were scratching the furniture and being aggressive to family members. Eventually, Will was ordered to stay away from Summer, and he received a fine and probation for his actions. A custody battle began between the two families. The Inmans reported to the police that Adam Peters posed a danger to Alex, Kaylee, and Alana. A frightening incident occurred late on the night of March 22, 2011. 25-year-old Summer was finishing her shift at the bank. As usual, she cleaned up her workspace and went outside around 11 p.m. to take out the trash. Before leaving, Summer had sent a message to Adam, whom she was supposed to meet after work, but he never saw her again. Concerned, Adam went to the bank after midnight. He couldn't find Summer, but near the trash can he discovered her belongings, her phone, keys, and a running music player with headphones on. A little further away, he found her jacket in the bushes. Adam called the police and notified Summer's parents about her disappearance. Initially, the family thought that she might have been late from work or misplaced her belongings. However, the bank security service informed them that she hadn't been seen since her shift ended. When the police arrived, several witnesses were already present. 2 women jogging nearby reported that they had seen Summer being kidnapped about an hour earlier. They explained that as Summer approached a dumpster, a Ford Crown Victoria, driven by a blonde woman, pulled up. 2 men wearing black balaclavas exited the vehicle, grabbed Summer, and forced her into the back seat. Despite her attempts to resist, scream, and plead for help, one of the witnesses who tried to intervene was met with pepper spray from the female driver. The kidnappers then drove away with Summer. The 2 women rushed to the nearest police station to report the incident, but for some reason, law enforcement was skeptical and even suspicious of their account, suspecting they might have fabricated the story for amusement. A whole hour had passed after Summer's parents called the police before they finally arrived at the crime scene. Unfortunately, by that time, it was too late for them to find Summer while the trail was still fresh. News of the abduction of 25-year-old Summer Inman quickly spread through local media. Hundreds of residents of Logan joined the search effort, but as days went by, hope of finding her alive began to fade. Summer's parents struggled to keep their thoughts away from the worst possible outcome. A few weeks prior to the tragedy, Summer had posted a picture on Facebook with Adam and the children, depicting what appeared to be a happy family. This photo infuriated Will Inman, Summer's husband. It had been revealed that Summer met Adam before deciding to divorce Will. In the spring of 2010, Adam started working for the Inmans, maintaining their house and yard, and he soon developed feelings for Summer. Initially, she rejected his advances, but eventually, she gave in. In her diary, she reflected on that moment, expressing that when their eyes met, she realized she had let the devil take hold of her and ignored the warnings from God. She mentioned that she tried to walk away, with her mind screaming to run, but she stayed and allowed Adam to embrace her, expressing her regret and guilt. Meeting Adam marked the beginning of the end for Summer and Will's marriage, as she realized that she wanted to pursue happiness, love, and to be loved, which ultimately led her to file for divorce. 5 days before Summer disappeared, Will attempted to challenge the alimony payments in court. He wanted to reduce the amount he had to pay his ex-wife from $150 per child each month to $50, as his annual income was only $6,500. Will, along with his parents, sought sole custody of the children, but the judge denied their request. Bill and Sandra deeply missed their grandchildren, who were the center of their lives. Since separating from Summer, the elderly couple had visibly lost weight and appeared weary. In March 2011, shortly after Summer went missing, the police found the Inman family, Bill, Sandra, and Will, were hiding in Bill's mother's house in Jackson County, Ohio. During questioning, all three of them consistently denied any involvement in Summer's disappearance. They explained that on the night she vanished, they had traveled to Cleveland to look at a new house. However, their car broke down, and they spent the entire night trying to fix it on the side of the road. They returned home to Logan the following morning. The Inmans stated that they had always treated Summer well and rarely had conflicts with her. However, they noted that after Adam Peters came into their lives, things took a turn for the worse. Bill, Sandra, and Will described Adam as a negative influence who had ruined their previously happy family. The police took an interest in a white Ford Crown Victoria that was parked near the Inman's house. They seized the car's GPS navigator and examined its route. They discovered that on the afternoon of March 22, when the kidnapping took place, the car was in Logan. The GPS was turned off at 5:30 p.m. that evening and only activated again the following morning, March 23, still in Logan. There was no evidence that the Inman family ever came to Cleveland. Additionally, phone records indicated that the suspects remained in Logan throughout the night from March 22 to March 23. On the morning of March 23 at 7:30 a.m., Bill, Sandra, and Will were seen at a car wash, where they had the car thoroughly cleaned inside. Summer was not with them. Afterward, the Inmans traveled to Cleveland, where they changed the tires at an auto repair shop. The mechanic found it unusual that Bill chose to replace nearly new tires with older ones. Additionally, the Inmans attempted to alter the car's appearance, and Bill removed a spotlight that he had previously installed near the side mirror. After the arrest, Bill attempted to reassure his elderly mother that they were innocent and that the trials they faced were a form of divine punishment. However, after several hours of intense questioning and realizing that all three could face the death penalty, Sandra eventually broke down. She confessed that they were responsible for the kidnapping of Summer on that tragic night. The men wearing balaclavas were identified as her husband, Bill, and her son, Will. Sandra explained that the abduction was entirely her idea. She intended to scare her daughter-in-law into allowing Will to see their children, but things quickly spiraled out of control. She stated that Will would admit to guilt for both murder and kidnapping. Sandra acknowledged that it was her idea to take Summer, explaining that she believed this would frighten her. Will tied Summer's hands, feet, and neck with plastic ties. Summer struggled and screamed, but then suddenly lost consciousness. Upon noticing that she was unresponsive, Will panicked and wanted to cut her free. He called out to his mother, asking where the knife was because he couldn't find it. As the family desperately searched for the knife, precious minutes passed. It was too late, and Summer had suffocated. Sandra insisted that they never intended to harm their daughter-in-law. Their goal was simply to scare her in order to resolve a custody dispute over the grandchildren so they could see them on weekends. On March 29, 2011, 1 week after the abduction, Sandra revealed the location where they had hidden the body. Summer was placed in an abandoned well on the property of the church that the Inman family attended, known as the Church of the Tabernacle of Faith, which is situated near Nelsonville, 30 kilometers from the bank where Summer worked. Bill Inman had previously helped build this church, and 28 years ago, he and Sandra got married there under its arches. When the police removed the concrete lid from the well, they discovered a disturbing scene. Summer was at the bottom, her body positioned head first. She was dressed in the same outfit she had worn on her last day, a black t-shirt that read, "I don't have an anger problem, I have an idiot problem." The autopsy revealed that Summer had died from strangulation. Besides the marks left by plastic ties on her neck, wrists, and ankles, there were no other injuries on her body. Sandra originally intended to dispose of the body in the river. However, she later thought the church well would be a safer place where it wouldn't be discovered. She confessed to her crime and showed genuine remorse for her actions. The trial soon followed. Bill, 49, and Will, 28, both pleaded not guilty to Summer's murder. Throughout the hearings, they spoke very little and avoided making eye contact with her parents. In contrast, Sandra took full responsibility for the crime, reiterating that the abduction was her idea. As she delivered her final statement, the woman tearfully pleaded for forgiveness from Summer's parents. Overwhelmed with emotion, Sandra clearly expressed her deep regret for the tragic events. "Summer was like a daughter to me," she cried. "If I could turn back time, I would never have made this terrible choice." In 2012, the court sentenced Bill and Will Inman to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Sandra received a life sentence but is eligible for parole after 15 years. The church friends and parishioners all agreed that Bill was the one controlling everything in the Inman family. He made all the decisions. No one thought that the idea of the kidnapping came from Sandra. It was well known that Will had been spoiled as a child, with his parents giving in to his every demand. Sandra realized that both her husband and son were as guilty as she was, but she continued to plead guilty, hoping that it would lessen the consequences for them. Alex, Cale, and Alana were cared for by the parents of Summer, who had passed away, for an extended period. They struggled to explain to their grandchildren the absence of their mother, father, grandmother, and grandfather. The tragic story of the Inman family highlights how concealed anger, jealousy, and a need to control others can result in devastating outcomes. Bill and Sandra, who appeared to embody piety and strong family values to everyone, revealed themselves to be oppressive figures to their daughter-in-law. Summer found herself trapped in a toxic relationship that stifled her will and desires. Her efforts to escape ultimately cost her life. Will, who was raised in this oppressive environment, became selfish and resistant to compromise. His obsession with reclaiming his wife and children at any price ultimately led to his downfall. The terrible crime committed by the Inman's family shattered multiple families, leaving 3 young children without their mother and a grandfather and grandmother without their beloved family member. This story highlights the importance of letting go of grudges, respecting others' boundaries, and building relationships based on trust and respect. Holding on to anger can eventually lead to outbursts that damage the most valuable aspects of our lives. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Mackenzie Sherilla. Mackenzie Sherilla was born in August 2004 in Strongsville, Ohio. The youngest of 3 children, Mackenzie received a lot of love and pampering from her parents, John Sherilla and Natalie Stevens. Her parents prioritized her education and encouraged she to pursue every goal she loved. Being the youngest also gave her a tolerance. She was often forgiven for many of her mischievous pranks during her childhood, and even when she committed some more serious mistakes, she would still be forgiven by her parents. Mackenzie grew up as a spoiled and entitled girl who often got her way. Her parents gave in to her demands, which led her to believe she could act however she wanted without consequence. As a young child, she was kind and friendly, but as she grew older, her behavior and character began to deteriorate. If things didn't go her way, she would throw tantrums, lose her temper, and use bad language. She was prone to physical altercations and would often disregard others. Mackenzie only cared about her own opinions and desires, insisted on getting her way, and prioritized her own interests above all else. During his teenage years, Mackenzie became very difficult and unbearable personality, but her parents never thought it was out of the ordinary. To them, her behavior was a normal part of growing up and a phase she would eventually outgrow. They chose to respond with understanding and patience. However, Mackenzie's behavior worsened over time. In high school, she started using alcohol and occasionally experimenting with illicit drugs, often managing to avoid consequences for her actions. Her reckless behavior not only endangers herself but also the people around her. Mackenzie's parents seemed to be unaware of, or possibly chose to ignore, the obvious issues their daughter was facing. Like many teenagers, she was glued to her smartphone and frequently posted provocative photos and comments on social media. Her actions weren't unusual among her friends, as they often engaged in vandalism, fought, stole, and had run-ins with the police. However, they rarely faced serious consequences, typically receiving only warnings and educational discussions, which may have led them to believe that they could act as they pleased without facing repercussions. Dominic Russo, a young man from Strongsville, was a stark contrast to Mackenzie. Born in September 2001, he was the 4th of 7 children to Frank and Christine Russo. Growing up, Dominic was close to his 3 brothers and 3 sisters. He was an exemplary student, actively participated in sports, and prioritized a healthy lifestyle. Throughout his childhood, Dominic excelled academically, participated in sports, and prioritized a healthy lifestyle. Despite being part of a large family, Dominic and his siblings never lacked parental love, attention, or care. Frank and Christine Russo were moderately strict but also supportive of their children's interests. As a result, Dominic always had a lot of friends and was accustomed to being the center of attention. His attractive appearance and charming personality made him a popular figure, and he had many admirers from a young age. However, Dominic preferred to focus on meaningful relationships rather than fleeting romances. After completing high school, Dominic attended a local university, specializing in performing arts with a focus on music production. His ambition was to become a renowned music producer, and he was also a skilled singer-songwriter. By the time he was 20, Dominic had established his own business, purchased a car, and was living in a rented apartment in a good neighborhood. Additionally, he excelled as a student and athlete at the university. Dominic first met Mackenzie at a mutual friend's party. This chance encounter turned out to be pivotal for both of them. As complete opposites, they found themselves drawn to each other. Dominic, with his charming and cultured demeanor, quickly caught Mackenzie's eye. He was distinctly different from the people she normally socialized with, possessing qualities that set him apart. He was well-educated, well-mannered, and engaging, able to effortlessly converse on a wide range of topics. Mackenzie had a striking appearance and a slender figure that caught people's attention. She knew how to present herself and often relied on her charm to make an impression. Mackenzie quickly won over the guy she had been interested in, Dominic, and by fall 2021, they started dating. Not long after that, the two introduced each other to their families. While Mackenzie's parents were thrilled with her choice, considering the guy an excellent match for their daughter, Dominic's parents had mixed feelings about Mackenzie. They found her endearing and innocent at first, but there was something about her that immediately raised concerns for Frank and Christine Russo. Those close to Mackenzie believed she had truly fallen in love for the first time, and they hoped this relationship would have a positive impact on her life. Unfortunately, no one could have predicted the tragic endings that would eventually bring their romance to an end. As Mackenzie and Dominic spent more time together, they began to appear in public, holding hands and showing affection for each other. It wasn't long before the entire small town knew about their relationship. While some people who knew Mackenzie well felt sorry for her boyfriend, Dominic, most were simply happy for the couple. As time passed, Dominic started to notice strange behavior in Mackenzie. She was constantly defiant and tried to get everyone to do what she wanted. At first, Dominic thought her behavior was due to her youth and desire for attention. Despite her behavior, the couple made plans for their future, discussing marriage as soon as Mackenzie turned 18. They also hoped to leave their small town and move to a big city, such as New York, where Dominic could pursue a music career and showcase his talent. Over time, Mackenzie's behavior became increasingly alarming and sometimes frightening to Dominic. She asks him to do what she wants, and if he doesn't agree with her, she gets angry and acts very nasty. Dominic initially disregarded Mackenzie's controlling behavior as a joking matter, but then he soon realized her true nature. In public, she maintained a composed exterior, but when they were alone, she took out her anger on him and sometimes attacked him. Dominic felt he couldn't stand his girlfriend any longer and proposed a temporary separation to reconsider their feelings. However, Mackenzie responded by having a very breakdown in front of their mutual friends. She yelled, threatened to harm Dominic if he ended the relationship, and even threatened to burn down his house and wreck his car. These actions had the opposite effect of what Mackenzie intended. This makes Dominic even more want to end their toxic relationship. Mackenzie was determined to hold on to her boyfriend, refusing to acknowledge the end of the relationship. Initially, she acted as though nothing was wrong, continuing to call Dominic and invite him to various parties and events. She also posted affectionate photos of the two on social media, expressed her love for him. However, when Dominic made it clear that the relationship was over, Mackenzie's behavior changed. She became furious and began showing up at his house almost daily, standing under his window and shouting insults and threats. She also resorted to calling him from different phone numbers, leaving messages on his answering machine, and sending emails. In these messages, Mackenzie's tone was inconsistent. Sometimes she will gently express her feelings for him and offer to restart the relationship. However, there are times when she will use insults and threats against Dominic. Dominic was baffled by Mackenzie's behavior, having never experienced anything similar before. He struggled to respond and tried various approaches, including talking to her and ignoring her. He also documented her aggressive outbursts using his phone. The situation became unbearable as Mackenzie would publicly scream at and insult Dominic whenever she saw him, making his life extremely difficult. Despite this, Dominic held on to the hope that with time, Mackenzie would eventually leave him alone and move on. Mackenzie made a shocking statement in front of witnesses, saying it would be easier for her to kill Dominic than to let him move on from her. She threatened that if he didn't return to her, she would make sure no one else could have him. At first, Dominic didn't take her words seriously, but those around him knew she was not joking. Her threats also included hitting and running him over with a car, driving him off a cliff, or stopping on railroad tracks in front of an oncoming train. She described each scenario in detail, as if she had already planned it out. However, Mackenzie soon realized that her threats and insults only pushed Dominic further away. She decided to change her tactics, switching from being aggressive to being sweet and charming again. She stopped pressuring and harassing Dominic and pretended to have learned from her mistakes, wanting to change for the better. She started talking about college plans, asking for his help in choosing a university, and claiming that she had become more focused on her studies, particularly her upcoming final exams. Dominic was pleasantly surprised by the changes in Mackenzie and, still having feelings for her, he decided to help her with her university enrollment. As they started seeing each other again, they gradually rekindled their closeness. Dominic began taking her on dates and spending all his free time with her, thinking she had become more mature and responsible. He fell in love with her again without even realizing it, and their past issues seemed to fade away. This time, they kept their reunion private and didn't tell their friends and acquaintances about it. Therefore, their dates are private and discreet, allowing them to enjoy their time together without seeking outside attention. When Dominic's brother Angelo found out, he warned that nothing good would come of it. But Dominic didn't listen, because he loved her too much, so he didn't pay attention to his brother's words. Dominic thinks that Mackenzie has changed positively after they reunited, but he had no idea what she was really planning. Unbeknownst to him, Mackenzie had devised a sinister plan to exact revenge on he. She became obsessed with the idea of a disastrous car accident. She would spend her free time traveling around the city and looking for the perfect place to carry out her plan. Mackenzie considered crashing into a steep cliff or stepping in front of the train, but she couldn't find cliff nearby and thought the idea of blocking the train was untrustworthy. One day, while driving through an industrial area, she stumbled upon a secluded spot with no cameras or traffic. A massive brick wall caught her attention, and her twisted imagination quickly conjured up a new and equally horrific plan. She decided that accelerating to top speed and crashing into the wall would be just as spectacular as the other ideas she had considered. Initially, Mackenzie had planned to end her life alongside her lover, Dominic, intending for their tragic story to become a cautionary tale for the entire city. She had confided in her best friend about this plan, but her friend thought she was joking because she had had such wild ideas before. In late July 2022, just days before Mackenzie's 18th birthday, she asked Dominic if he wanted to attend a mutual friend's party with her. She told him that it would be the perfect opportunity for them to have some fun, relax, and make it clear to everyone that they were back together and deeply in love. Dominic quickly agreed, as he still trusted Mackenzie and didn't question her feelings or intentions. On the night of July 30th, Dominic and Mackenzie arriving at the party holding hands. Their entrance caught everyone's attention, and they looked happy and in love as they openly displayed their affection for each other. Their friends were genuinely thrilled to see them reunited but notice how well-suited the couple was. When night fell, Dominic and Mackenzie freely took photos, kissed and enjoyed their time together without any hesitation. However, no one had any idea that this joyful celebration would take a devastating turn. Dominic and Mackenzie drank some alcohol, like other people at that party, but Mackenzie secretly took a dose of illegal drugs, for courage, to not change her mind at the last minute and slammed on the brakes. The next morning, Dominic and Mackenzie bid farewell to the guests and began to head out to their car. However, they were approached by a friend of the guy, Davion Flanagan, who requested a ride home in their vehicle. Mackenzie tried to decline request, said that they had made other plans, but Dominic didn't see any problem with driving his friend home. Mackenzie eventually relented, and she agreed to give Davion a ride home. Mackenzie took the driver's seat, with Dominic beside her and Davion behind him. They left the party venue and headed onto the main road. Mackenzie drove cautiously, adhering to the speed limit and avoiding drawing attention to themselves. When they approached an empty intersection, she stopped at the red light. As they waited, Davion dozed off, allowing her to reconsider her intentions. In her later statement, Mackenzie claimed she had planned to die in an accident, but her words were discredited by the fact that she had buckled her seatbelt during the previous stop, while Davion remained unbuckled. As the light turned green, Mackenzie suddenly accelerated and took a sharp turn onto a poorly lit secondary road that led into an industrial area. Dominic and Davion seemed unaware of what was happening, and the car sped up as if Mackenzie had lost control. Pressing hard on the gas pedal, she careened the vehicle toward a brick wall. Luckily, a witness happened to be in the area. On an early Sunday morning, the industrial area was deserted, with no other people around to see the accident or offer assistance. However, a woman who lived near the scene heard the crash and went outside to find out what's happening. Seeing smoke and realizing a car had crashed, she quickly returned to her home to call for emergency help. About 30 minutes after the accident, medics arrived at the scene. Unfortunately, Davion and Dominic in the car succumbed to their injuries and died instantly. Mackenzie, however, was fortunate to have survived thanks to her seatbelt and airbags. Mackenzie, the driver, was unconscious and trapped in the wreckage with severe leg injuries, but she was breathing and had a palpable pulse, giving hope that she will survive. During the process of being freed from the car, Mackenzie briefly regained consciousness but she appeared disoriented and unaware of her surroundings. Once released from the vehicle, she was immediately rushed to the hospital for treatment. At the hospital, doctors diagnosed Mackenzie with multiple fractures and viscera injuries. Blood tests also revealed that she had been under the influence of both alcohol and drugs at the time of the accident. The police initially received leads and a confession in the investigation. After learning the results of Mackenzie's tests, it was thought that she was under the influence of addictive substances and didn't understand her actions. It's possible she tried to drive through the wall or didn't notice any obstacles, as there was no sign of braking. Since Mackenzie was unconscious in the intensive care unit after a complex operation, the police couldn't question her at first. When she regained consciousness, she became hysterical and confessed to the doctor, saying she deliberately crashed into the wall to kill Dominic and initially intended to die with him. Mackenzie also said that Dave was an unintended victim because he was hitchhiking in their car. Doctors dismissed Mackenzie's confession, believing it was a delusional state caused by anesthesia, painkillers, and grief over her boyfriend's death. However, when the police spoke with Mackenzie, her story changed completely. This time, Mackenzie said she remembered almost nothing about the incident of that night due to consuming alcohol and using illegal substances. Mackenzie claimed she had a memory lapse after getting in the car and had no idea how Davion ended up in the car. However, evidence contradicted this. Surveillance footage tracked the car's initial route and showed Mackenzie driving cautiously and following the rules until she suddenly turned onto a road leading to an industrial area. Furthermore, it was discovered that Mackenzie had previously driven the entire route days earlier, and her car had been spotted by multiple witnesses. After being discharged from the hospital, Mackenzie quickly recovered and attempted to resume her disinterested life. She showed no remorse for her actions and was confident about evading consequences. She became active on social media again, met with friends, and made future plans. By September, she even attended a concert in a nearby city, featuring her favorite band, seemed unaffected by her boyfriend's passing. Mackenzie lived an active life despite having her legs in a fragile state. She would often appear at concerts in a wheelchair, wearing vibrant makeup and taking selfies to share on social media. Just a month after recovering, Mackenzie attended a Halloween party in a pre-made costume, where she met new people and enjoyed herself. However, her life has changed completely on November 4, 2022, when she was taken into custody. The investigation gathered enough evidence to bring the case to trial. Mackenzie was charged with premeditated aggravated double murder and possession of a controlled substance found in her pocket and detected in her blood. However, during the trial, Mackenzie changed her testimony multiple times. Initially, she claimed to have memory loss, but when her friend testified against her, revealing her plan, she shifted her defense. Mackenzie then claimed she had intended to die alongside her lover, but this was disproven when it was discovered she had secured herself with a seatbelt. Mackenzie Sherrill was found guilty of all charges on August 21, 2023. However, due to her age at the time of the crime, just 5 days shy of her 18th birthday, the court took this into consideration and tried her as a minor. Under state law, Mackenzie was eligible for consecutive 15-year prison sentences without parole for each murder she committed. However, due to her young age, the court decided to let her serve these sentences simultaneously. This meant she would be eligible for parole in 15 years. By that time, Mackenzie would be 33 years old. Both the prosecution and defense expressed displeasure with the court's decision. Dominic family members felt the sentence was too lenient, and they intended to appeal for a stricter punishment. On the other hand, Mackenzie's parents and lawyer believed the sentence was too harsh and decided to appeal as well. The judge refused to change the sentence, questioning whether Mackenzie would be released after 15 years in prison. In his opinion, Mackenzie showed no remorse for her actions and displayed arrogance towards the court. The extended prison term would provide her with ample time to reflect on the gravity of her crimes. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Annie Tayan. Annie Tayan was born on May 1, 1965, in Charleston, South Carolina, and was raised by her mother. She had a strong love for life, dancing, fun, and the simple pleasures it brought. Annie dreamed of having a family and considered motherhood her greatest goal. She began this journey very early, giving birth to her first son, Jemia, at the age of 18, followed by her second son, Sean, just a year later. By the age of 20, she welcomed her third child, a daughter named Shane. Unfortunately, shortly after Shane was born, the children's father left Annie, became uninvolved in their lives, and abandoned the family. Annie faced the hardships of raising 3 young children in a rented apartment in Maine. In 1987, when her youngest daughter Shane was only 6 months old, Annie, 22, met Michael Palin, 32, a Navy officer stationed on the aircraft carrier Bramby. Their meeting took place in Portland, Maine, where Michael's ship was docked, and he felt an immediate attraction to Annie during their waterfront encounter. Michael lived in Charleston, South Carolina, and was a respected member of the Navy, known for his work as a computer systems operator. He was actively involved in military operations and had received several awards. Annie was fascinated by Michael's naval career and quickly fell in love with him, telling a friend that she had found a man she felt was truly worthy of her love. After dating for a few months, Annie and Michael decided to move in together, creating a family with 2 sons and a daughter. Unfortunately, their life together took a tragic turn when a fire broke out in their apartment. Annie was away at the time, leaving Michael with the children. Michael, along with Jemia and Sean, were able to escape, but Shane, who was too young to walk, was left behind. When Annie returned, she tried to enter the burning apartment to save Shane, but the neighbors prevented her. The loss of Shane in the fire had a profound effect on Annie. After the devastating fire, Annie and her sons moved to her mother's house in Portland. Meanwhile, Michael focused on his work and decided to stay in the barracks. A few months after the move, a disturbing event occurred near Annie's mother's house. A shed in the backyard was set on fire. The police quickly traced the source of the fire and found a lighter engraved with the name Bramby, the ship on which Michael served. This discovery made Michael the prime suspect in the arson case. However, despite the incriminating evidence, the police were unable to link him to the crime due to insufficient evidence. After the second fire, Maine child welfare authorities discovered that Annie's sons were living in unsafe conditions with her. As a result, they made the decision to remove Jemia and Sean from her custody and place them in the care of the Department of Social Services. This decision devastated Annie, who tried her best to regain custody of her children. But she was unsuccessful and lost custody of her sons. When Michael's ship returned to Charleston, South Carolina, he settled into a rental apartment and reunited with Annie. Despite their complicated past, Annie decided to move in with him in Goose Creek, a suburb of Charleston. However, while there, Annie discovered a photo of Michael wearing a wedding ring, revealing that he was married. When confronted, Michael confessed to Annie that he had been married but was now divorced. He explained that his ex-wife, Dawn Breeze, and their 3 children lived with his mother in Savannah, Georgia. Although Michael assured Annie that he was no longer in a relationship with Dawn, Annie was deeply troubled by this revelation. She considered leaving him but ultimately chose to stay, seeing Michael as a partner with whom to start a family. However, their living situation became negative. Michael became increasingly hostile and disrespectful to Annie. As she considered moving back to her mother's home, she discovered she was pregnant. This unexpected news kept her from leaving and brought her joy as she anticipated the birth of another child. In October 1989, Annie gave birth to her 4th daughter, Jade. Although she knew Jade could never replace her lost daughter, she felt that Jade filled an important void in her heart. In the month after Jade was born, Michael's treatment of Annie worsened. He began publicly insulting and humiliating her. Annie confided to a friend that she feared that if she tried to leave, Michael would relentlessly pursue her. His controlling behavior increased. He locked Annie in their apartment. When he left for work, he would disconnect his phone and take it with him. Annie became increasingly concerned about his actions. Annie, feeling distressed, called her best friend Katie French. During the call, Annie revealed that she was planning to leave Michael. However, Michael threatened that if she left, their daughter Jade would stay with him and Annie would never see her again. Overwhelmed, Annie cried and begged Katie to come immediately to help her and Jade. Unfortunately, Katie was busy and unable to help. Instead, she sent Annie money for a bus ticket, hoping that it would help her escape and return to Portland. This urgent conversation turned out to be their last. 2 days later, on November 7, 1989, Katie tried to contact Annie but received no response. A few days later, Michael informed Katie that Annie had left on November 6, taking her belongings and heading to an unknown destination. Katie expected Annie to contact her from her new home, but after 2 weeks of no news, she grew increasingly worried. By Thanksgiving, November 24, Annie had been out of contact for 20 days. Worried about Annie's safety, Katie tried to contact Annie's friends and acquaintances, but no one had any information about her. When Katie tried to report Annie Tayan, 24, missing to the police, she was told that she could not file a formal report because she was not a family member. As months passed without any updates on Annie, Katie finally contacted Michael's mother. Katie was shocked to learn that Annie's youngest daughter, Jade, was living with Michael's mother. The news confirmed Katie's deepest fears. She was certain that Annie would never willingly leave her daughter behind. Shortly after the disturbing events, Michael Palin moved to the naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. He did not appear to be concerned about her disappearance. Michael did not contact the police or begin a search for Annie. The official search began after Annie's mother reported her missing. Initially, the investigation focused on her husband Michael Palin, who quickly became the prime suspect. Michael explained that on the morning of November 6, he woke up to find Annie had left, leaving their daughter with him. Michael said that the night before, Annie had mentioned that she wanted to end their relationship. Michael did not look for Annie because he thought their relationship was over and felt no need to contact her any further. He also claimed that he was unaware of Annie's disappearance. After searching the couple's rented apartment, the police found no evidence. Annie Tayan's case seemed to have stalled, with no further search for her. Questions about her current location, whether she was still alive, and the possible motives of any kidnappers remain unanswered. The only known fact is that the last person confirmed to have seen her was her partner, Michael. For 4 long years, there was no news or sign of Annie. Her best friend, Katie French, was the only one actively looking for her. She worked tirelessly on the investigation, and her phone bill alone cost her approximately $16,000. Katie hired a private investigator and was determined to continue the search. She contacted various organizations to gather information about Michael's background. Katie was convinced that Michael was dangerous and untrustworthy. She was terrified of him, knowing that if Michael learned of her ties to the police, it could put her in danger. In 1993, Annie's case was transferred to the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, marking a major change in the investigation. Naval Criminal Investigative Service agents began a comprehensive review of the case from the beginning. They found Michael Palin, who was staying at Pearl Harbor Naval Base in Hawaii. When Coast Guard agents attempted to speak with him about Annie's disappearance, Michael agreed to speak only if his attorney was present. He then completely stopped cooperating with the investigation and refused to provide any further assistance or information. The Coast Guard agents gathered all available information about Annie's disappearance and contacted the South Carolina Police Department. They asked the department to cross-reference their records with any unidentified bodies, noting that Annie had given birth just a month before her disappearance. South Carolina police then reported a case involving a dead woman who had also given birth a month before her death. They provided a sketch of what the woman looked like, shocking the Coast Guard agents. They believed they had found Annie Tayan. The discovery revealed a brutal murder, with her body found next to a highway in Jasper County, South Carolina, about 100 miles from her home with Michael. The crime scene photos were horrifying. Annie's face was severely crushed, and her skull was broken into 124 pieces, requiring nearly 500 hours of detailed reconstruction. Her body was found in a duffel bag that had been doused with gasoline and set on fire. The burning bag was discovered at 6 a.m. on November 7, 1989, the same time Katie French noticed Annie had stopped answering her calls. Annie was identified by comparing her dental records to those of the unidentified woman. After Annie's body was found, Michael became the prime suspect in her murder. The Coast Guard developed a detailed investigation plan, starting with a review of his financial transactions. They discovered that on the day Annie went missing, Michael had made a credit card purchase about 25 miles south of where her body was found. Additionally, his phone records showed that on the morning of November 6, he called his mother's home in Savannah twice, once at 4:35 a.m. and again at 5:17 a.m. Based on this evidence, police believe that Michael killed Annie in their apartment, then moved her body and left it on the side of the road, where he burned it. Naval Criminal Investigative Service agents targeted Michael Palin's ex-wife, Dawn Breeze. At the time of Annie's death, Dawn was still married to Michael and lived in his mother's home in Savannah. After Annie went missing, Dawn divorced Michael and began moving around the state several times, apparently trying to avoid someone or something. Agents eventually tracked her down to Miami, Florida, in the summer of 1995, nearly 6 years after Annie Tayan's murder. When they found Dawn, she was making a living through psychic activities. During a visit to her workplace to discuss Annie's disappearance, Dawn responded surprisingly calmly. She asked how long the conversation would last, saying she wanted to eat if it lasted. This response surprised the agents, as they had expected a more emotional response regarding Annie. However, Dawn remained calm throughout their discussion. During the 10-hour interrogation, Dawn's story initially matched Michael's. She said that when she visited Michael's apartment, he told her that his mistress had left and that he planned to raise their daughter on his own. However, Dawn was silent, looked down, and said that she wanted to tell the truth. Her next speech was emotionless and tearless as she shared what she had kept secret for 6 years. Dawn revealed that Michael had called her to his Charleston apartment early one morning. She discovered Annie's body on the living room floor. Michael told Dawn to go into the bedroom to see his daughter. At the time, Dawn and Michael were still legally married and had 3 children together. Michael admitted to Dawn that he had had an affair with Annie, which resulted in the birth of a daughter. He begged her to accept the child and help him raise his daughter. Dawn claimed that rather than face a custody battle with Annie, Michael chose to kill to gain custody. Dawn added, on the night of November 5th and 6th, 1989, Michael and Annie went to bed after having sex. After a while, Annie fell asleep. At this point, Michael violently attacked her with a crowbar. Their daughter, Jade, was lying next to Annie in bed during the horrific incident. Michael continued to beat Annie on the head with increasing brutality. Despite her attempts to fight back, Annie eventually died of her injuries on that same bed. Michael contacted his wife, Dawn, asking her to come immediately. He then placed Annie's body in a large bag and put it in the trunk of his car, where he also had a can of gasoline. He drove with Dawn and their daughter Jade in the back seat for about 100 miles. When they reached a quiet area on the side of the road, Michael took Annie's body out of the trunk, doused it with gasoline, and set it on fire. After making sure the fire was burning well, he quickly returned to the car and drove Dawn and Jade back to his mother's house in Savannah. Dawn's revelation was crucial evidence in the investigation. The police asked Dawn to make a recorded phone call to Michael to talk about Annie's murder. Dawn agreed and called Michael, expressing her concern about the discovery and identification of Annie's body. Michael's response was, "No, they didn't." During the call, Dawn told Michael that blood had been found in their old apartment and that Naval Criminal Investigative Service agents suspected they were involved in a murder. She encouraged Michael to come up with an explanation for the blood. Michael responded, "Okay, we need to work together and come up with a solution." Although he did not admit anything directly, his demeanor showed that he understood the seriousness of the situation. At the end of the conversation, Michael warned Dawn to be careful with her phone calls and assured her that they would work together to resolve the situation. Naval Criminal Investigative Service agents took Dawn to the crime scene to search for any remaining evidence. To protect her identity and ensure her safety as a cooperating witness, they disguised her before arriving at the apartment. Dawn carefully described and demonstrated where Annie's body was and the sequence of events. She pointed out a spot near the wall and baseboard where a significant amount of blood had seeped into the carpet and concrete floor below. Since Michael had moved out, the landlord had replaced and cleaned the carpet several times, which explained the lack of visible evidence. However, when the police used a special chemical on the concrete floor, a large purple stain appeared, indicating the presence of protein and confirming Dawn's account of where Annie's body had been. Despite the blood on the concrete, the Naval Criminal Investigative Service agents had difficulty confirming that the substance was blood, so they continued to search for more physical evidence. Dawn pointed to a nightstand containing a television next to the bed where Annie had been killed. She noted that blood had splattered on the television during the murder, and Michael had said that it needed a thorough cleaning. He had then disposed of the television, possibly selling it rather than throwing away a working appliance, given his frugal habits. Finding the television was difficult, but the agents were determined to find it. At this point, Michael Palin realized that the Naval Criminal Investigative Service was watching him, especially after a phone call with his ex-wife, Dawn. Naval Criminal Investigative Service agents were concerned that Michael might flee, or that he might threaten witnesses, harm them. On October 11, 1995, Michael attempted to escape, but was quickly apprehended and taken into custody by police. While Michael Palin was in police custody on suspicion of murder, Naval Criminal Investigative Service agents worked tirelessly to find and interview all the residents of the apartment complex where the murders took place in November 1989. Their efforts were rewarded when they spoke with a neighbor who said he had purchased a television from Michael. Amazingly, the television was still working and in the neighbor's home. The police quickly confiscated the television and sent it to the FBI lab for forensic analysis. This investigation led to a crucial discovery. Analysis found 11 blood stains inside the speaker. These blood samples were later compared to Annie's DNA, providing crucial evidence in the murder case. At this point in the case, Michael's attorney announced that he was willing to plead guilty, but only if the death penalty was removed from consideration. The prosecutor was not pleased with this development, but military law required such a plea bargain to be negotiated at trial. Michael admitted his guilt, recounting the details of his crimes objectively, his account showing no signs of remorse or empathy. As a result, he was convicted and sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 30 years. He was also dishonorably discharged from the Navy. Dawn Breeze, who knew about her husband's crimes and remained silent for more than 6 years, escaped legal consequences thanks to her crucial confession to the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, which greatly aided the investigation. Annie's children now know the truth about their mother's tragic fate and understand that she did not abandon them. Hi there, investigators. It's time to uncover the truth behind another case. The case of Frank Spencer. Frank Spencer was born on November 10, 1965, in Bloomsburg, Pennsylvania. His father was Cyrus, and his mother was Melina Spencer. Since childhood, Frank loved active games and sports, which helped him maintain a healthy body and mind. When he was in high school, he demonstrated his special ability on the wrestling team and was recognized as an excellent member. Frank had a strong ambition in business and wanted to continue the family business. So, after graduating from high school in 1984, he attended a local university and completed his course in 1988. After his father passed away, Frank became the owner of Spencer's Auto Parts. The year 1997 marked an important event in Frank's life. It was the year he met Maria. The two of them were attracted to each other at first sight. Maria was known for her hot temper and daring personality, which intrigued Frank. Frank's friend Paul remembered that Frank had always liked strong and wild people. And he was a bit like that too. When Frank and Maria met, they had a great start. However, not everyone was happy with the relationship. Maria's parents, in particular, had mixed opinions about Frank. They believed that Frank was not the right man for their daughter. Furthermore, there were rumors that Frank's father had been involved in a gang and was even a hired criminal. Maria's father did not have a good impression of Frank. He even tried to prevent their marriage for a while. Frank's family was also not happy with Frank's choice. So, Frank and Maria decided to run away and rent a separate apartment to get away from their families. After a while, Frank's family and Maria's family were forced to accept their relationship. Family life gradually returned to normal. Maria and Frank got married and had 2 children, a boy and a girl. They then moved to a new house. During this time, Frank owned an auto parts business and sponsored race cars. He worked hard to provide his family with everything they needed. For Frank, his children were the top priority and driving force in his life. Maria initially tried to manage the housework and take care of the children. However, later, despite having a law degree, she became the coach of her daughter's soccer team. Her friends said that, unlike her husband, she was not really interested in the marriage. She seemed to be uninterested in work and family responsibilities. What worried her most was the financial issue. she liked to spend what Frank earned. Maria Spencer had a cold personality, especially towards the children. This caused many problems in her marriage. Her husband was frustrated with her selfishness and eccentricity and expected her to change when she became a mother. However, Maria remained her own person. In 2006, her husband decided to file for divorce because he could no longer stand her inappropriate behavior and constant scandals. He feared for the health of the children because of her unreasonable behavior. After the divorce, the relationship between the two became even more strained. A confrontation over custody was inevitable. Maria wanted to keep the children with her, but her husband did not trust her and believed that she could not take good care of them. However, not everyone agreed with her husband's views. For example, her husband's friend, Ron, believed that both parents were necessary for the children to develop normally. Frank's friend advised him to negotiate with Maria for custody of the children. However, Frank thought he knew better than his friends and continued to demand sole custody. Maria did the same. She also hoped to receive a substantial amount of child support. The conflict between Frank and Maria worsened over time. On several occasions, due to Maria's erratic behavior, Frank had to call the police for help. Maria repeatedly attacked Frank and the children, but not everyone believed this. In 2008, an incident occurred that confirmed Frank's accusations. After a fight with Maria near their children's school, Maria was arrested. The problem stemmed from Maria wanting to pick up her daughter. But Frank's relatives prevented her. The reason was that the two had made another agreement, but Maria changed her mind at the last minute. After the fight, Maria put the child in the car but forgot to fasten the seatbelt. When the police checked her car, they discovered that Maria's actions could endanger the life and health of the child. As a result, Maria got into trouble with the law. She was charged with disorderly conduct and child endangerment. In addition, Frank also accused Maria of stalking him, claiming that she had stalked him on multiple occasions. For this reason, Maria faced an additional charge. Maria could not be convicted of endangering the life of the child because the prosecution could not prove it. Therefore, the authorities decided to drop the charge in exchange for Maria's admission of guilt for disorderly conduct and stalking. Maria agreed and was fined $600. However, this event did not make Maria reconsider her behavior. Instead, she continued to act negatively. Frank's acquaintances and relatives increasingly heard complaints from him about Maria threatening and stalking him. Some of Maria's co-workers also said that she repeatedly mentioned that she hated Frank and was willing to harm him. For this reason, one of her co-workers nicknamed her Black Widow. Frank tried to stay calm and smooth over the rough edges, but Maria wouldn't stop. He kept trying to talk to her, but she wouldn't listen. Frank started recording every conflict so that he would have evidence in case something bad happened. He just wanted to live and work in peace, but Maria took it too far. In 2009, Frank tried to stay positive and eventually met a woman named Julie. However, Maria soon learned about his new relationship. According to Maria, she didn't care that Frank was dating Julie, but what bothered her was that Frank gave Julie access to the children. However, Frank thought that Maria was extremely jealous, and that was the cause of all the trouble. Maria then became very angry. In February 2009, she sent a voice message to Julie, warning her not to go near the children. However, the situation worsened when Maria's father was released from prison after serving 5 years for fraud. His reputation was already bad, and for Frank, this meant more trouble, as he knew Maria's father had a fierce temper. Many believed that Maria had inherited her fierce personality from her father. As Frank became pensive and anxious, his colleagues noticed it too. The first incident that happened after Maria's father Anthony was released was a robbery at Frank's office. Important documents that could affect Frank's divorce were stolen. The next day, Maria called Frank and hinted that she had found something interesting. Frank understood that she was referring to the stolen documents and advised her to return them. At the same time, he also reported the incident to the police. However, it was unsuccessful in proving that someone was involved in the incident. The detectives did not find any traces of the perpetrator. However, everyone suspected that Maria and her father were involved in the crime. The police also considered Maria a suspect. In the end, the investigation of the case was stopped. However, thanks to the intervention of the police, Maria returned the stolen documents to the owner. It is likely that these documents did not contain any important information that could be used in court. The situation between Frank and Maria continued to escalate. Frank's patience was at its limit after Maria repeatedly threatened him on social media. This was because Frank's children were still in contact with his new partner, Julie. Julie, on the other hand, remained calm and balanced, enjoying her time with Frank and his children. She tried not to interfere in Frank and Maria's complicated relationship. However, Frank was extremely angry that Maria had neglected her parental responsibilities. The arguments between the two continued until 2010. At that point, Frank sought the intervention of law enforcement. He asked the police to evaluate Maria's behavior. Despite the threats, Maria insisted that it was just her way of communicating and that she meant nothing reprehensible. Again, Maria's guilt could not be proven because her warnings were vague. In January 2010, a fire brought negativity to Frank. In a strange coincidence, before a romantic trip to the Caribbean islands that he had planned, a fire broke out at Frank's mother's house the night before the trip. Fortunately, no one was injured, but all the property was destroyed by fire and smoke. During this fire, witnesses reported seeing a car driven by Maria, accompanied by neighbors and friends, visiting the house at that time. Maria smiled and watched the fire before leaving. After the fire department put out the fire, a dog owned by one of Frank's children was found dead in the fire. Maria's actions crossed the line, forcing the police to investigate the incident. Unfortunately, there was no clear evidence of arson at the time, and the fire was ruled an accident. Maria then sent Frank a frantic text message, gloating about how karma had caught up with him and how her life had been ruined. She hinted that Frank could face more consequences in the future. Maria also began sending similar messages to Julie, Frank's new partner. When the police failed to act, Maria's aggression escalated. She became so dangerous that she openly threatened Frank and Julie. A few months later, a fire broke out at Julie's house. This time, the situation could have been much worse. Julie was home when the fire broke out, but she was lucky to escape by jumping off the porch. Although she was uninjured, her house was severely damaged and uninhabitable. As a result, Frank invited Julie to move in with him. Frank and Julie feared that this would only make Maria angrier, but they had no other choice. The police are investigating the exact cause of the fire. A similar situation in the past suggests that the fire may have been intentionally set by an individual. Frank and Julie live in a different district than the burned street. So they hope that the police will conduct a fair and impartial investigation. However, once again, there is not much they can do due to the lack of concrete evidence. However, the investigators did not give up. Julie hired private investigators to join the investigation, which pushed the inquiry in a new direction. During the inspection, 2 flares were found on the lawn. One was broken and lying nearby. Investigators also discovered that the fire had spread from the steps leading to the balcony of the house. Finally, after collecting and examining the data, experts determined that the cause of the fire was arson. However, the lack of direct evidence has prevented authorities from identifying the perpetrators. The suspects remain at large and have not been prosecuted for their crimes. The cold summer of 2012 marked a tragic event in the life of the Frank family. In June 2012, Frank and Julie decided to split up, but in reality, it was just a plan to distract Maria. However, this also marked the final farewell of the Frank family. Just a few weeks later, Frank was found dead. On July 3rd, Joe, a close friend of Frank's, decided to visit him because he had not heard from him for a while. Joe and Frank used to take their children out together, and their team was currently in an important series of matches. However, when Frank did not answer the phone, Joe decided to visit him in person. When he arrived at Frank's house, Joe became worried when he saw that the front door was slightly ajar and there were stains near it. His fear was confirmed when he entered the house and saw Frank lying motionless on the floor. Frank's face was serene, as if he had finally found the peace he had been looking for. However, when Joe walked around the body, he saw dried blood in Frank's ear. Without hesitation, Joe called emergency services. As news of the incident spread throughout the county, everyone knew that this was a terrible crime. However, the detectives had to take matters into their own hands to find out who was behind this murder. Investigators discovered many important signs at the crime scene. They found large pools of blood and drag marks on the floor, along with a clear shoe print and bloody gloves in the kitchen. This physical evidence was sent for analysis. The investigation results showed that the bloody shoe print matched the size of the gloves that Maria's father, Anthony, often wore. Furthermore, Maria's DNA was found on the gloves. Since Maria had not lived with the family for over a year, the presence of her DNA on the gloves was unlikely to have happened by accident. All the evidence pointed to the involvement of Anthony and Maria in the case. Both were subsequently arrested. Autopsy results and ballistics analysis revealed that Frank had been shot with two different weapons. The first bullet was fired from a .30 caliber sniper rifle as he stood by the front door. Forensic experts found a sniper nest about 115 feet from the house. The bullet went through Frank's arm and chest, causing severe and fatal injuries. The attackers dragged Frank into the house, where they fired a final shot into his head with a .357 Magnum revolver. Frank was already dead at that point. This action was considered an act of revenge, suggesting that the shooter harbored a grudge against the victim. Police speculated that Anthony shot Frank with the rifle. There were also some important clues left behind. Frank's car and dog were missing from the house, implicating Anthony and Maria. A review of traffic cameras showed Frank's car driving away from the victim's house shortly after the crime. However, the driver could not be identified. The car was later found in Sunbury, Pennsylvania, 27 miles from Frank's house and 5 miles from Maria's residence. However, no fingerprints or other evidence were found inside the car. Frank's dog was found 2 days after the crime when it wandered into a wedding in Dauphin. Thanks to an electronic chip, attendees realized that the dog had an owner. The dog was later returned to Frank's mother. The fact that Frank had purchased the dog after the fire helped shed some light on the case. During the investigation, detectives discovered that the criminals had taken the dog as they were fleeing the scene. During the time Anthony was stopped, the dog was attracted to the smell of food nearby and escaped. It then wandered into a house where a wedding was being held, where it was found. This helped detectives prove that Anthony's phone was near the venue of the celebration on the day of the crime, even though he claimed to be at home in Harrisburg, 12 miles away. It is possible that Maria was the one who put the dog in the car, but this decision proved to be a mistake. During questioning, Anthony admitted that Frank had asked him for help several times and that he had visited Frank the day before Frank died. This would explain the traces found at the crime scene. However, Anthony could not explain the presence of the pool of blood. His testimony sounded disingenuous. Anthony also confessed that Frank had given him the car to use that same day. apparently to justify his fingerprints at the victim's house. This would indicate that he had been at the crime scene the day before. Searches were conducted at Anthony and Maria's homes to find the murder weapon, but Anthony was a seasoned criminal and knew how to handle weapons. Therefore, neither the rifle nor the pistol was found. Maria also refused to admit her guilt. She assumed that the glove had been accidentally sent to her ex-husband's house, possibly because the children had moved it one day. Eventually, Anthony and Maria were released to go home. However, detectives continued to investigate and collect the evidence needed to solve the case. Meanwhile, Frank's friend Derek Reed tried to talk to Maria at a school football game. During the conversation, Maria confessed that the last thing her husband saw before he died was her face. This statement was strange and curious. The investigation into Frank's death received intense attention from the state attorney general. The attorney general was furious with the indifference of the authorities to Frank's reports and statements. The police also faced numerous complaints of incompetence, and an internal investigation was inevitable. However, the police's negligence in their duties could not be proven. The reason was that much of the information provided by Frank, which the police believed lacked solid evidence, contributed to Frank's tragic death. The public and Frank's relatives were outraged that their petition had not yielded results. Meanwhile, investigators tried to prove the suspect's guilt not only in the crime but also in stalking and other crimes committed before. In 2013, a major interrogation was held. At the same time, Maria and Anthony continued to claim their innocence, denying all 12 charges against them. Their unwillingness to cooperate with the investigation led to charges of providing false testimony. Prosecutors argued that the suspects had arrived at Frank's home together, but they chose not to use their own vehicles to avoid attracting attention. Instead, they fled the scene in Frank's car. By the end of 2014, Maria was recaptured. Meanwhile, Anthony successfully escaped. After being interrogated one last time, Anthony boarded a plane and flew to Colombia. According to the investigation, Anthony's escape was evidence that he was hiding his guilt. For 11 months, Anthony was on the run but was eventually captured in Buenos Aires, Argentina. After being arrested by local police, he fought extradition to the United States but was unsuccessful and was deported back to his home country. In the fall of 2015, Maria's trial began. She continued to deny her guilt and blamed her father. She claimed that she loved Frank and never wanted him dead. However, multiple witnesses came forward to shed light on her true nature, recounting the threats, stalking, and sabotage she had committed. After more than a week of trial, the jury returned a verdict, finding her guilty on all counts, including murder, arson, burglary, perjury, conspiracy, and menacing. Maria was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus 50 years. Witnesses reported that she smiled throughout the trial. Years later, Anthony's trial began. Anthony was furious when he heard his daughter's accusations. He claimed he was only helping her but objected to the use of violence. However, the physical evidence suggested otherwise. Finally, in the fall of 2018, Anthony was convicted of murder, robbery, and arson. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole, plus 45 years. When he was sentenced, the 77-year-old blew a kiss to the prosecutor and the lead detective before cursing at the judge. Years later, Anthony sought to appeal, claiming his defense attorney was ineffective, which led to his conviction. His daughter, Maria, also tried to appeal her case. However, both Maria and Anthony efforts were unsuccessful. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Elle Edwards. Elle Edwards, a 26-year-old woman, she was a vibrant and beautiful young woman who worked as a cosmetologist at a local beauty salon and assisted a dermatologist. Her positive attitude and kindness have helped her win the hearts and satisfaction of all her customers, even the most difficult ones. Edwards is a highly skilled beauty professional, known for being cheerful and always smiling. At the same time, she was determined and constantly working towards her goals and dreams. On December 24, 2022, her sister Lucy flew in from Dubai to spend the holidays with their family, and Edwards eagerly awaited her return. To celebrate this special occasion, Edwards, her sister, and their friends decided to go to the local pub in Liverpool's Wallasey Village, UK. Here they were having a fantastic time, laughing, dancing, and singing karaoke in a joyful atmosphere. Without their knowledge, someone with ill intentions was nearby. As they exited the pub at approximately 11:50 p.m., someone placed an emergency call. Shortly thereafter, a minimum of 12 shots were fired. Edwards was struck by 2 bullets, and she's suffering a severe head wound. The emergency services were immediately dispatched to the scene. They quickly loaded Edwards into an ambulance and rushed her to the local hospital. Unfortunately, she succumbed to her injuries en route, as they were fatal. When the police informed Edwards's family of the tragedy, they were shocked and disbelieving. No one could comprehend how this could have happened to Edwards, a beautiful and lively young woman. It was unthinkable that she could have had enemies who wished her harm. In the early stages of the investigation, detectives had no leads. The attacker launched a surprise assault and then quickly disappeared, leaving behind a single shell casing in the victim, who was severely bleeding at the location where the crime occurred. The assault was swift yet clearly premeditated, affording Edwards no opportunity for survival. However, it was unclear whether the attacker meant to target Edwards or if Edwards was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time and got hurt by someone who was mentally unstable. A car of unknown origin pulled up near the entrance of the pub, and shortly thereafter, gunfire erupted. Apart from the fatality, 4 other men sustained gunshot wounds of varying degrees. All of the victims were young adults, aged between 22 and 33. Police initially believed Edwards may have been a random victim of the attack. It was known that criminal gangs operated in the area and the shooting might have been a confrontation between gang members. However, this was just speculation that needed to be confirmed or ruled out during the investigation. To learn more, the detectives looked into Edwards's background. Like the witnesses, Edwards's relatives had no idea who would want she dead. The detectives planned to speak with more witnesses and those who had been shot at by the unknown criminal. They also asked the pub owner for security footage. The investigation involves conducting interviews with numerous individuals and thoroughly reviewing extensive video footage. Multiple police officers were working on the case. It was necessary to answer several difficult questions following the attack. The large number of victims raised concerns about whether the attack was a spontaneous act of aggression or a targeted assault. To investigate, all witnesses were interviewed, and authorities began analyzing mobile communications data, which proved to be a time-consuming task. The media was alerted to aid in the investigation. Law enforcement officers appealed to the public for assistance, urging anyone with valuable information to come forward and visit the police station. Specifically, they were looking for any video recordings that might have been taken by eyewitnesses, which could potentially show the car used by the perpetrator. To encourage people to share any relevant information, the police held a meeting with local residents. It was assumed that someone might have witnessed the attack or have information about the perpetrator. To encourage people to come forward, community leaders reassured residents that they should not be intimidated by the criminals or the local feuding clans. The police visited residents door to door to gather information and provide support. Specially trained officers worked with Edwards's family to provide emotional support during this difficult time. Through their efforts, it was discovered that the perpetrator had left the pub parking lot in a dark-colored car. Although witness accounts were limited due to the darkness, the vehicle was most likely a dark Mercedes. Later, outdoor surveillance cameras confirmed the events. The killer drove into the parking lot, but didn't immediately open fire. Instead, he observed the pub visitors for some time from his car, which was positioned to give him a clear view of the entrance and most of what was happening inside. He seemed to be waiting for the most convenient moment to attack. After a few minutes, when Edwards got out, the killer quickly got out of the car, fired 12 shots in a row, then immediately got back in and drove away. Investigators studied the recordings and concluded that the attacker acted alone, without any backup. Unfortunately, it was impossible to determine exactly where the perpetrator fled. The detectives conducted a thorough investigation, going door to door to speak with local residents, providing a detailed description of the car and the circumstances surrounding the incident. Their goal was to identify the killer. The streets were patrolled 24/7, and within 2 days, they had detained 2 suspects. However, their involvement in the crime couldn't be proven without proof. The detectives then made a public statement, vowing to continue their pursuit of the unknown shooter until they were brought to justice. This was intended to reassure local residents, who were outraged by the rising crime rates and the authorities' seeming inability to stop it. There was speculation that the attack may have been sparked by a feud between local gangs, with Edwards being an innocent bystander. However, this theory was still unconfirmed and required further investigation. It was determined that the intended targets of the shooting may have been Jake and Kouri, 2 members of the local Beechwood gang who were at the pub that evening. They had a long-standing and intense feud with another group vying for control of the territory. On December 29th, police arrested a person of interest, but he was not the shooter. Although he had a solid alibi, the detective suspected that he may have been involved in planning the attack. Around the same time, authorities identified the dark Mercedes car used by the killer to leave the pub's parking lot. However, due to a lack of direct evidence, the name of a third suspect was not released. The car was tracked through surveillance footage and identified with the help of cameras. However, the police were unable to respond in time. On December 31st, a report was filed with the police department stating that a fire had started near the scene of the shooting. When the special services arrived at the scene, they found a dark Mercedes engulfed in flames, which resembled the perpetrator's vehicle. The fire had completely burned out the vehicle, destroying valuable evidence. It's clear the perpetrators knew the police were closing in, so they intentionally destroyed one of the key pieces of evidence. Although the fire didn't completely destroy the car, investigators confirmed it was used during the shooting. However, the Mercedes had been stolen shortly before the attack and didn't belong to the perpetrators. The arson was likely committed to hinder the investigation. Following the January 11th murder, police took 2 more suspects into custody in Central Wales, Connor Chapman, 22, and a 23-year-old woman. Connor was a familiar figure to police, with his extensive criminal record. Before the murder of Edwards, Connor began his downward spiral into a life of crime with increasingly bold lawbreakings. His early offenses included a car theft under severe circumstances, and he was repeatedly suspected of robbery, hooliganism, and making threats. At one point, Connor led police on a high-speed chase before ditching the car and hiding in nearby bushes. Upon being caught, he feigned innocence, claiming he had no idea what the officers were talking about and was simply waiting for a friend. This brazen act earned him a degree of notoriety, landing his details in newspaper headlines. Connor Chapman, a resident of Birkenhead, Liverpool, was raised by his grandparents after being abandoned by his parents at a young age. He moved into their house and struggled academically, eventually dropping out of high school before his exams. As a teenager, Connor was considered a troublemaker and had his first brush with the law in 2014, when he was 14 years old, for shoplifting. 2 years later, in 2016, Connor committed another offense by stealing a car. He was caught driving the stolen vehicle without a license or insurance, violating the terms of his suspended sentence. In 2017, he was convicted of possession of a controlled substance, while also violating a restraining order by entering areas of the city he was banned from, all under police surveillance. Connor was prohibited from appearing in public due to the risk he posed to society. However, in 2018, he disregarded the ban and was detained by the authorities while in possession of a knife and banned substances. The same year, Connor Chapman came to the attention of the general public after a failed attempt to evade the police in a stolen vehicle. The incident occurred when the city patrols spotted a stolen Audi and instructed the driver to stop and exit the vehicle with hands raised. However, 18-year-old Connor refused to comply, leading to a pursuit. During the brief chase, Connor committed multiple traffic offenses, including exceeding 80 km/h in 30 km/h zones, repeatedly driving into oncoming traffic, and ultimately crashing into the curb at high speed. The impact sent the car careening to the side and spinning around. Unable to continue, Connor exited the vehicle and fled on foot. However, the patrol caught up with him in the bushes just a few hundred meters away. Connor claimed he was waiting for a friend, but it was clear he was not telling the truth. In court, Connor's lawyer explained that his client had been influenced by a group of older friends who were a bad influence. The court decided not to punish Connor and released him. It was discovered that he had attention deficit disorder, along with several other conditions, which were diagnosed by a private specialist. Connor in question was sentenced to up to 8 months in prison due to numerous traffic violations and reckless behavior. Additionally, he was banned from driving after his release. By the time he reached adulthood, he had accumulated 14 convictions for 30 separate offenses, demonstrating a clear pattern of disregard for the law and social norms. It is clear that he has no intention of reforming and constantly refuses to conform to the rules and norms of society. Although his behavior was recognized as potentially hazardous, there were no sufficient legal grounds to isolate him from the community, primarily because his actions had not yet resulted in serious harm to anyone. The public expressed anger and frustration with the authorities for not taking action against Connor Chapman, a man with multiple convictions. Despite his numerous run-ins with the law, he continued to commit crimes, putting innocent lives at risk. In January 2020, he was sentenced to 10 months in prison for possession of a cold weapon and substances in a public place. The police publicly warned the community about him, and after serving his sentence, he was wanted for at least 5 more crimes. When caught, Connor boasted about spending more time in prison than out, seemingly proud of his record. By 20, he had accumulated 19 sentences for 43 crimes. However, he was released again in the summer of 2022, just 6 months before the death of L. Edwards. During this time, he appeared in court again, and his lawyer attempted to garner sympathy by sharing that Connor's first child was born while he was in prison. At this point, Connor's girlfriend was pregnant with a baby girl. He claimed to have turned his around and wanted to make amends, but this was just a ruse. In reality, he wanted to escape and return to his life of crime. The police were already aware of his involvement with a local gang that sold prohibited substances, but he was being tried for a lesser offense, the burglary and theft of 2 electric motorcycles. On December 24th, a violent altercation erupted between 2 rival gangs in Beechwood Estates, near the wooden church. The gangs were fighting over territory, but failed to reach an agreement. Seeking revenge, a young gangster armed himself with a submachine gun and waited 3 hours to track down his targets, Kieran and Jake Duffy, who were at the Moke Pub. Just before midnight, he drove to the parking lot, identified his victims, and waited for the perfect moment to strike. Then he exited the car and fired 12 bullets into the building. Duffy was seriously injured, but he survived despite the life-threatening attack. However, L. Edwards was not as fortunate. She was hit by 2 bullets in the head. Edwards fought for her life, but she died in the medic's arms on the way to the hospital. Edwards had unintentionally crossed paths with the killer's targets that evening and had no idea the night would end so tragically. The pub was crowded at the time of the attack. One person was killed, and 4 others were wounded. A 22-year-old man was shot in the leg, a 24-year-old man was wounded in the arm, and a 33-year-old man was injured in the wrist. Fortunately, none of these injuries were life-threatening. Edwards's friends tried to provide her with first aid and performed CPR at the scene. Unfortunately, their efforts were not enough to save her life. Edwards's sister, Lucy, was much luckier. She had been living in Dubai and had flown home to celebrate Christmas with her family just minutes before the attack. She had already left the pub, so she was not affected at all. Later, Lucy recalled how she had wanted to take her sister with her, but Edwards had wanted to stay with her friends. On January 25, 2023, a funeral was held for Edwards, who was tragically killed in a gang-related incident. Hundreds of people attended to pay their respects to the innocent victim. A hearse pulled by 4 white horses carried her body to the local church. As a sign of respect, the pub where she had last celebrated was closed for the day. The pub's owner also shared a message of support for her family on social media. Connor Chapman was subsequently charged with multiple offenses, including murder. It was discovered that Connor had an accomplice, 20-year-old Thomas. A video recording was found on Thomas during the searches, made shortly before the attack. In the video, Connor is seen handing over a weapon and stating his intention to settle accounts with someone. After the attack, Connor and Thomas hid the stolen Mercedes together, planning to dispose of it later. Although the murder weapon was never found, DNA traces from the killer were detected on one of the shell casings. It became clear that Connor had loaded the weapon before the attack, as evidenced by the presence of red gloves found at his house, which were visible in CCTV footage from Moke. After committing the crime, Connor and Thomas abandoned their car and ordered a taxi under a false name to throw off investigators. They used the taxi service to cover their tracks. At approximately 5 a.m., they went back to the location where they had hidden the car in order to take additional steps to cover their tracks and hide their involvement. Thomas Nord was found guilty of all charges in July 2023 and received a 9-year prison sentence. The relatively lenient sentence was due to his limited prior criminal history compared to Connor. Jake and Kieran, members of the local Beechwood gang, were wounded during the attack but managed to survive. Given their gang affiliation and the ongoing conflict with a rival group, the violent incident was not unexpected. It became known that on December 23, 2023, Connor Chapman's group, including Kieran and his friend, were attacked and beaten by another individual from the same group. Although they did not receive serious injuries, this incident occurred just a day before they were attacked with firearms. At the time, they seemed to view the beating as a random altercation and subsequently went to a pub to relax. After the shooting incident, while the shooter, Connor, awaited sentencing for the murder of an innocent victim, Kieran and his friend were already imprisoned. Kieran received a 27-month sentence for attacking members of a rival criminal group and an additional 9 months for the fight. His friend was sentenced to 2 years and 9 months for a similar offense. It appeared that Kieran and his friend were attempting to avenge the attempted murder. As a result, prohibitive court orders were issued against them, imposing various restrictions. Although this approach did not prevent the gang from engaging in further criminal activities, it did provide a basis for more severe punishment if they continued to disregard the court orders. The public was outraged that gang members received lenient sentences despite committing multiple crimes. It became clear that the existing bans were ineffective in maintaining public safety. For instance, Connor was banned from visiting the area where the pub was located, but he still managed to steal a car and enter the pub despite having a driving ban. During the trial for L. Edwards's murder, Connor attempted to dispute the claim that he was the person seen in the CCTV footage. He claimed that at the time, he was at home wrapping Christmas gifts. Nevertheless, sufficient evidence was collected to expose the facts. The hearings lasted 3.5 weeks, exposing all the incident leading up to the attack. It was discovered that the motive behind the attack was a turf war between two rival gangs. Connor had no connection to L. Edwards, he was completely indifferent to her fate, as well as the fate of the other innocent people in the bar. He was driven solely by uncontrolled rage. After attempting to murder two rivals, Connor planned to escape to Spain to evade capture. He used a stolen car and disposed of the murder weapon, trying to avoid detection by the police. He also avoided using public transportation. Ultimately, detectives apprehended Connor at the airport. After being arrested, Connor attempted to mislead the police by stating that the Mercedes he was seen driving on the day of the murder was not stolen. Instead, he claimed it was a shared vehicle used by his criminal group for distributing substances. He denied being the driver and continued to try to convince the jury that he was not the one who opened fire that evening. In a desperate bid to escape the consequences, Connor claimed he had only just discovered that someone from his group had used the vehicle to attack the pub. Before the jury deliberated on the verdict, L. Edwards's father gave a heartfelt speech, expressing his hope that the perpetrator would never be able to spend Christmas with his loved ones as a free man again. The jurors, comprised of P. Asen and Sim Janine, reached a unanimous verdict after 3 hours of deliberation. They found Connor Chapman guilty of all charges, citing that he had committed the crime with callous disregard and showed no remorse for the accidental killing of L. Edwards, taking away her promising life. Rather than showing regret, Connor spent several days systematically eliminating all evidence and traces of the murder that could implicate him. The motive behind the attack was attributed to a rivalry between criminal gangs. On July 7, 2023, Connor was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after serving 48 years of his sentence. After the verdict was announced, L. Edwards's father raised his fist in triumph. However, the incident sparked widespread public outrage. The city's residents felt unsafe knowing they were caught in the middle of a turf war between rival gangs. These gangs possessed a large number of firearms and had shown a willingness to use them, as evidenced by L. Edwards's murder. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Heather Maples. Heather Nicole Maples was born on August 23, 1992, in Ocala, Florida. Her mother, Jennifer Hunter, had called Heather the storm baby because she had always been full of energy and courage, which had made many people jealous. In 2004, Jennifer Hunter gave birth to her second child. Heather had been very happy to welcome her younger brother Ryan into her life. However, Ryan was later diagnosed with developmental delays. Heather spent all her free time taking care of Ryan, helping him learn to talk, walk, and eat. In the following years, Heather showed her love and devotion to her younger brother. Until her graduation, she devoted all her time to Ryan. At the age of 22, Heather Maples decided to leave her hometown of Texas and start a new chapter in Tennessee, where she pursued her dream of becoming a psychologist. Heather's journey began when she received a call from her old classmate, Chaz. He had invited her to Murfreesboro, Tennessee, where he was studying. Chaz believed that this had been the perfect place for Heather, where she could get a good opportunity to prepare for college. Heather accepted the invitation and went to Murfreesboro in January 2015. There, she started a new life and her relationship with Chaz grew stronger and they became lovers. With the support of her best friend Kelsey, Heather found an office job in the area where they lived. She had to balance her work in college preparation, but everything seemed to be going well. However, Heather's relationship with Chaz did not last long. Soon, they decided to break up. Chaz moved away, leaving Heather alone in Murfreesboro. In early August, Heather had been excited to call her mother to share the great news. Heather had been accepted to college, and her mother had been so proud. On a normal morning at her real estate brokerage firm in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, on August 7, 2015, Kelsey Price had arrived at work and begun her daily routine. However, she had noticed that her friend and co-worker, Heather, had been running late as usual. Kelsey had decided to call Heather to wake her up but had received no response. Remembering Heather's plans for the night before, Kelsey hadn't been worried because Heather had asked her to pick her up if she overslept or didn't answer the phone. So, Kelsey had decided to go to Heather's apartment to wake her up. Heather's apartment had been in the same complex where they had worked. When she arrived, Kelsey had found the front door unlocked and had gone inside. She had found Heather lying on her bed, sleeping on her stomach, wearing only a crop top and no underwear. At first, Kelsey had thought Heather had had a wild night, but when she had tried to wake her up and had gotten no response, she had begun to worry. Kelsey had tapped Heather's leg, but there had still been no response. When she had touched Heather's leg, Kelsey had noticed that her leg had been very cold and had felt terrified. Kelsey Price had left the apartment and immediately called 911. Emergency services had quickly arrived on the scene. Detective Tommy Massey had been one of the first to arrive at the crime scene. He and the forensic team had conducted a thorough search of the apartment. There, they had discovered that Heather had been brutally beaten, showing signs of torture and sexual assault. Heather's hair had been covered in blood and splattered against the walls. Detective Massey and his partner, Detective Maples, had recalled the case as a terrifying nightmare. Witnessing this heartbreaking scene had been difficult, especially since they had shared the same last name as the victim, Heather Maples. Detectives had quickly realized that the case could be related to Heather's personal life. At that time, most of her friends had been suspected because they had all been close to Heather. In particular, her apartment had shown no signs of forced entry, suggesting that the attacker might have been invited in by Heather. While examining the scene, detectives had discovered several important pieces of evidence. Among them, an unidentified DNA sample and a hair that hadn't belonged to Heather had both been sent for analysis. In addition, a bloody fingerprint on the right side of Heather's bed had been a very important clue. According to Detective Massey, if someone had intentionally created a fingerprint, the trace wouldn't have been so clear. This fingerprint had also been sent for analysis in order to find the perpetrator. Heather's cell phone had been found in her apartment, but without a password, the police couldn't access the phone. At this time, Kelsey had played an important role in helping the police with the phone and also in notifying Heather's mother of her death. Detective Massey had hoped to get more information about Heather from her friend Kelsey Price. Kelsey had said that the relationship between Heather and Chaz had been quite tense because Chaz had had anger management problems and had been sometimes too aggressive with Heather. Therefore, Heather had decided to end this relationship. Having received important information, the police had decided to investigate Chaz immediately. However, an unexpected development had occurred when a young man named Michael had appeared at the crime scene. He had had the key to Heather's apartment and said he had met Heather at a bar. Michael had said that he hadn't had sex with Heather. Michael had testimony that the evening before Heather had died, she had called him and invited him to dinner. After dinner, Michael had gone home, and Heather had gone to a local bar with friends. Heather had called Michael at 11:40 to ask for help because she had been having trouble at a bar. A man named Otavio had been bothering her and making her uncomfortable. Michael had agreed to go to the bar to help and then had driven Heather home. When they had arrived at the house, Heather had called Michael and asked him to buy some things, including biscuits, gravy, eggs, and sausage. After buying those things, Michael had driven Heather home and seen her go up the stairs. That had been the last time he had seen Heather, at approximately 2:30 a.m. on August 7th. During questioning, Michael had explained that he had had Heather's key and often unlocked the front door for her. He had also said that Heather's front door had often been left unlocked because she hadn't had a pocket for her keys. Investigators had taken Michael's fingerprints and DNA, but the results of the analysis had shown that they hadn't matched the fingerprints and DNA found at the crime scene. After Michael had been cleared as a suspect, investigators had turned their attention to the man who had been with Heather that night, Ottavio. Kelsey's help in unlocking Heather's cell phone had raised the police's suspicions of Ottavio. Detectives had discovered that Heather had texted Ottavio, a friend of hers, inviting him to her apartment just hours before she was found dead. When asked about Ottavio, a friend of Heather's had said, "I didn't know much about him. He seemed like a really nice guy. He was funny." When asked why Heather had sent this friend a photo of herself and Ottavio, the friend had been unclear. However, when questioned further, the friend had explained that Ottavio had been more aggressive than usual at the bar, and Heather had been taken by surprise. She had not been prepared for this. Detectives had decided to speak to Ottavio to get his side of the story. Ottavio had said he had been hanging out with Heather. Ottavio and Heather had had some tequila and then had gone to the gym for a while. When asked about the photo of Ottavio and Heather, Ottavio had said it had been taken before they left for the gym. The photo had been taken by Heather and posted on Snapchat. The detectives had immediately realized that Ottavio had known nothing about Heather's death. But what if he had been involved in the case? Meanwhile, the interrogation had continued. The police had said that Heather had texted him and asked him to come to her house. However, Ottavio had denied it. When asked about Heather's late-night text, Ottavio had said that she had texted him around 2:30 but that he had fallen asleep and only saw the text the next morning. The detectives had escalated their questioning of Ottavio with a harsh interrogation method. They had told him that people had seen him at Heather's apartment, that there had been surveillance footage of him, and that there had been pictures of him with Heather. They had said that Ottavio had gone to Heather's apartment after she had texted him to come back, and then something had happened. They had also told him that there had been strange DNA all over Heather and that it would be compared to his DNA. Ottavio had been shocked by what he had heard. He had seemed genuinely clueless about what had happened to Heather. After questioning, he had agreed to a DNA test, believing that it would clear his name. The results had proved him right, as the DNA found at the crime scene did not match his, so the police had eliminated Ottavio as a suspect. Detectives had continued to investigate, reviewing surveillance footage and carefully examining every detail provided by witnesses, but had still had no leads on the case. On the 9th day of the investigation, Detective Massey had been about to leave the office late at night when he had received an important call from a forensic lab director. The call had brought the answer Massey had been waiting for regarding the bloody fingerprints found on Heather's bed. The prints had been matched to a young man named Brandon Bowling, who had a fingerprint record from a previous job at a company. While questioning Brandon, Detective Massey had asked Brandon how he had known Heather. Brandon had replied that they had met at the gym. Massey had continued by asking Brandon when exactly he had met Heather. It had been clear that Detective Massey had been taking a lighthearted approach to the interview, wanting to give Brandon a chance to explain what had happened that night. After hours of questioning Brandon, he admitted that he had last been to Heather's apartment in July and had never seen her again. However, the police produced evidence of his fingerprints on Heather's bed, which matched his own. Since the fingerprints collected from Heather's house were fresh, the detectives believed that Brandon was lying. Apparently, Brandon had some secrets and was hiding them, which raised suspicions about him. Brandon seemed to realize that all the evidence was against him and that he could be arrested, but he continued to deny any involvement in Heather's death. After questioning, the investigators asked Brandon to provide a DNA sample, claiming that if he was innocent, the test results would prove it. Brandon agreed and hoped to be released from police custody, but that did not happen. Investigators asked the court for permission to access Brandon's phone to track his movements, calls, and texts on the night of the murder. When the court granted permission, they discovered a video on Brandon's phone that shocked even the most experienced detectives. In the video, Heather's room was recorded, capturing everything from intimate behavior to beatings. Heather was still alive at the time of the recording. As a result, Brandon Richmond Bowling was arrested. In February 2018, Brandon pleaded guilty to assaulting Heather Maples. Consequently, he was sentenced to 40 years in prison without the possibility of parole. During the trial, Heather's mother, Jennifer, made a strong impression with her emotional speech. She announced that she forgave Brandon Bowling for the crimes he had committed against her family. After the trial ended, Jennifer met Brandon Bowling's mother in the hallway. There, she expressed her sympathy and shared the woman's pain with a warm hug. She said that they both lost a loved one that day. Unfortunately, however, Brandon Bowling never revealed the real reason behind his actions, leaving many questions and thoughts about his motives.